luck.
Wow, pura vida. Much love and respect. Thanks for tuning in once again. I got a good video for you guys. Might be a little long one, but very informative. Just want to remind everybody that it's not just one-sided when it comes to history, not just one line, not just one nation. There's an ancestry and genealogy that gets left out a lot, many times because we were assuming these were so-called white people, and they had nothing to do with us, with the history, the lineage, the bloodline. We're going to read a great article here on this website, Access Genealogy. And while we're reading this article, which has some great information, we're going to go over some past presentations to corroborate what is being written in this website, especially for the new people. If you're new to this, going over these original colonists, these original settlers, these original indentured servants, these original explorers, conquistadors that were in North America. Little known history of how a lot of these people stayed behind and settled, and most likely lived amongst the American Indians and had families with them. So again, I'm on Access Genealogy, a free genealogy website. This article is called Castaways, Deserters, Refugees, and Pirates. 40 years before Spain was able to establish a permanent colony in North America. North Africans touched the hijack. This is literally, they're saying Iberians, right? Moorish, Sephardic Jews. They just call them North Africans, we're going to see. Attempted to obtain permanent resident status in the land of the free. All right, so they're not talking about them coming here as shackled up as slaves. This is a documented fact, not speculation or an interpretation of available circumstantial evidence. All right, we're talking about real history here. What is not known is whether they were accepted as citizens of a particular indigenous province, started their own community, or were killed by the locals. Because of the propensity of Native Americans to be initially hospitable to guests, the probability is high that at least some of these newcomers survived and added their DNA to the regional gene pool. Continuing here, there is no accurate measure of the number of shipwrecks along the South Atlantic coast and the Gulf of Mexico, but the number must be in the hundreds or even over 1,000. Also not known is how many shipwrecked sailors and passengers survived in North America during the 1500s and 1600s, or how many Sephardic Jews, Muslim Moors, and European Protestants. And Protestants, most of the Protestants we already know are Moors or Jews, Sephardic Jews. Escaping the Spanish Inquisition, right? The Spanish Inquisition, so they were going after the Protestants. The Inquisition, I thought that was for Jews and Moors. Remember? So because these people are crypto-Christians or new converso Christians, they are Protestants now, but they are secretly Moors or Sephardic Jews who were also escaping the Spanish Inquisition because it was the same people. Landed on the shores of the present-day southeastern United States. All right, they don't know, they're telling you. We don't know how many came. We can't say it was a little bit, we can't say it was a lot, but we can't leave out the possibility that it was a lot. Surviving archives, however, do furnish credible evidence of these people settling in the interior of the Southeast, while officially England was only colonizing the coastal regions. All right, so officially they're telling us, well, only the English came and colonized. No, you know, they're leaving out this big part they're telling you right here of the Spanish, or these Sephardic Jews and Muslim Moors, and these European Protestants, right? Huguenots and all these other Protestants or new Christians, conversos, cryptos. Now, I was going to give an example. It's going to give us a lot of examples in this website. We're going to go over this information. It starts with San Miguel de Guadalupe colony, 1526 to 1527. Now, we got a video on this. We're going to go to it. We're just going to read a little bit of what it's saying right here in the website. It says, in 1526, Lucas Vasquez de Leon, a wealthy Spanish sugar planter from Hispaniola, and he wasn't, this is a whitewash image, all right? Personally financed a colonial expedition that contained over 600 colonists. Historians currently believe that the colony was established on one of the islands at the mouth of the Altamaha River in Georgia. Leon either was not a competent logistics planner or he expected to steal what food he needed from neighboring indigenous villages, as was the practice farther south. However, the indigenous peoples along the coast were only part-time agriculturalists. Much of the flat terrain was unsuitable for agriculture, especially on the islands. While the village was under construction, the 80 Moorish prisoners of war, 80 what? Moorish, who were essentially slaves. Who's the slaves? Not Africans coming from West Africa. These are people, Iberians. They were, remember, they're doing the Inquisition, right? They're getting rid of their Sephardi Jews and Muslim Moors. So a lot of them becomes prisoners of war, who were essentially slaves, became increasingly irritable, and finally rebelled. Apparently, with the connivance of neighbor Indians, the Moors went AWOL. The who? The Moors. So what happened? They got together with the Indians and led a revolt. Oh, remember they always telling us the Africans did a revolt against their slave masters. Actually, it wasn't Africans. And Moors doesn't necessarily mean they were coming from Africa either. We already know that. They're talking about Portuguese and Spanish Moors, the Iberians they were kicking out. They were never seen or heard from again. What happened to these 80 Moorish prisoners? They got with the Indians and bounced. All right, so where's their descendants? This was in the 1500s. We're going to show you what? 1520s. 1520s. Unlike the Arawak culture, it was the custom of Muscovian provinces to be inclusive. Great sons often ruled over several ethnic groups. Bands of friendly strangers would be assigned to unoccupied lands and incorporated into province. All right, who? Friendly strangers. They were getting what? Assigned occupied lands by the Indians. Therefore, it is quite likely these Moors settled somewhere within the interior of Georgia and intermarried with the locals. What? These Moors what? Married with the locals. Muscovian originally had no concept of skin color-based racism. You understand what they're trying to say? They're trying to say the Muscovians were light-skinned, so that's why they didn't care that the Moors were dark-skinned. These are all people of color. Dodge to hijack. All right, and you see this little footnote right here where they're getting this information. If you click on it, which I did, it brings you to this book, New Order of Things, Property, Power, and the Transformation of the Creek Indians, 1733 to 1816. Okay? By Claudio Sant. The info's there, the history is there. What? More settling in Georgia, escaping, right? Going AWOL, as they said. Getting with the Indians, the wild Indians together, and fleeing, right? Disappearing. A lot of them intermarrying with the local women. A lethal form of dysentery with symptoms like cholera swept through the colony, eventually killing many of the colonists, including Leon. Meanwhile, the survivors suffered from starvation and scurvy. A total of about 150 colonists made it back to Hispaniola in the late spring of 1527, all right? So, the Leon expedition, right? You see what happened? He wasn't successful. He eventually died there, and a lot of his so-called prisoners, which wasn't just Moorish prisoners, it actually also included some Indians they were bringing up from Hispaniola and the Caribbean. So this is my video right here. The first colony was not Roanoke. This is the cover, San Miguel de Guadalupe, first colony, Lucas Vasquez de Leon, and it proves that the first slaves were not in 1619. I don't know if you guys caught that, right? He had slaves, right? And this is way before 1619. So what do you mean the first slaves came in 1619? See, you guys didn't catch that, huh? So this is the video. We're going to get into it. So we're in this part of the video real quick, where we're reading from Jews and Muslims in British colonial America. Great book. We read every chapter. Make sure to catch up to the presentations. And it says, we have already mentioned of South Carolina's very early Sephardic Moorish history. South Carolina. Remember my South Carolina video? All right. So if you haven't watched that video, this is the one I'm talking about. It says Sephardic Moorish Morisco free people of color plantation owners of South Carolina, Huguenots and servitude. All right, it's a great video. Make sure to get this video. You see, as you can see, the book that we're reading right now, using Muslims in British colonial America, and some more information, other sources as well. Make sure to get that video if you haven't watched it before. And again, just want to remind you, everybody, if you're new, make sure to go back, try to catch up on the information, to see what we have already researched and gone over, so we can surf the wave in real time together and go through the journey together. All right, let's go back. So again, we have already made mention of South Carolina's very early Sephardic and Moorish history, very early. In 1526, Lucas Vasquez de Ayllón, a prominent settler and sugar grower, on his Hispaniola, set an expedition to North Atlantic coast. The colony of 500 settlers, including Ayllón, landed somewhere on the South Carolina coast, but met with several disasters. A year later, 150 of the colonists managed to straggle back to Hispaniola. The fate of the remaining ones is unknown. They don't know what happened to them. They can't say they all died. We would argue that these settlers were very likely Sephardim and Moors, because we're about to go read how he brought them slaves and Indians. So he brought up Indians, as well as these people, Sephardic and Moorish people. All right, so I just want to go ahead and stop it right there and real quick, just let you know to see how they're corroborating the website, that these were Sephardic Jews and Moors, these people, these so-called settlers, prisoners of war, soldiers they were bringing. All right, continue. Right, a lot of them were being persecuted and they were looking for a new place, a new home, and he was helping them because he was also a Sephardic Jew. All right, so again, we're gonna read how, first of all, they lied to us, talking about they brought the so-called first slaves in 1619. That's a lie, because we're about to show that this Ayllón supposedly brought his own so-called slaves or Negro slaves, right? A lot of these so-called Negro is what we got to relate to what we're reading right now. Again, could have been an Indian, or it could have been a Sephardic Jew or more. We just read earlier, right, that there was 80 Moors, prisoners of war, that were basically slaves. It told us straight up, basically slaves, but they were actually Moors who were prisoners of war. So we got to dodge the hijack with the information I'm about to read you in the next couple of books. All right, and just go with the flow. At least to the point is that we're going to prove that we're proving so many things today. First of all, that 1619 was not, we already know there was people of color here in America since ancient times. So that's not the first so-called, black people that came, and then regarding the first so-called slaves or servants, that's also false, because again, we got this expedition who we're going to see as we read later on in this video. They were also considered so-called Negroes. When you don't know the history that a lot of these are Sephardic or Moors, they leave that out. They just call them so-called Negroes or slaves. But we're going to see that they had Caribs and all the other indigenous populations they were bringing up out of these 600. They needed servants too. They needed people to carry the bags and all that. So it's all that. So again, we would argue that these settlers were very likely Sephardim and Moors, as there is little else to justify their being willing to leave the settled prosperity of Spanish Hispaniola to venture to the mosquito-ridden unknown coast of North America, unless the recently arrived Inquisition had caused them to recalculate their odds in a Catholic colony. In 1563, the Frenchmen were aided by Sir John Hawkins, an English privateer. Chapter 1, it says, Ayllón. Now remember, John Hawkins was also a Sephardic Jew. He was a privateer or pirate. Who were the pirates? Who had the ships? It says here, Ayllón is a Sephardic surname. All right, Ayllón is Sephardic Jew. These are people of color. That's why I told you, dodge the hijack with the whitewashed images. The settlers named the place where they first made landfall River Jordan, or the Jordan River, present-day Cape Fear River. All right, this is the area. We would advance the same reasoning for Hernando de Soto's a Sephardic surname. De Soto, Hernando de Soto, a Sephardic surname. He's also a Sephardic Jew. Remember Hernando de Soto? We got the video recently, how he went up in the Ptolemy temple. It was full of pearls with all his Moorish soldiers too. Remember, man, they changed the script on us. They gave us these false narratives. And this is the genealogical history of these people. If you really study their family's ancestry, De Soto, Leon, what these people really were, you see that these were Sephardic Jews and Muslim Moors, a lot of them. They're these original Spaniards and colonists. All right, 600-person expedition in 1540 through the southeastern region of North America. So that's when they went to the Ptolemy temple. Remember, he said he couldn't even carry back all those pearls. Even if he had 600 people, there was not enough of them to carry all the pearls that were inside that temple in the same area. See where they are, right? So it might have been somebody wrote back to me, said, hey, it might be in the Savannah River in Georgia. I'm like, yeah, you might be right. And I just wanted to show you guys that Leon, because we're going to be talking about him, is not going to mention any of this in those books. It's not going to say nothing about him being Sephardic or him bringing up Moors. That's why I wanted to come here first and you know, get this new information in here, right? So we can get a clearer perspective of who this Leon guy and who he might have also in the 600-person crew of his ship, right? Moors and Sephardic Jews trying to escape the Catholics.
So the book is called Spanish Settlements Within the Present Limits of the United States from 1513 to 1561 by Woodbury Lowery. All right, so we're in chapter 2 of this book.
And I just want to stop it right there real quick. So that was the book we're about to read in this video. Again, I'm skipping through different parts of the video. This is 25 minutes in. Make sure to catch the whole video. It's really, really good. I just skipped over a lot of good information as I was doing this. We're going to get to the part we're talking about right now about Lucas Vasquez Leon, the Leon expedition. Okay, so again, that was the book. And here's the part we're going to read.
His name was Lucas Vasquez de Leon. So Leon. All right, so it says here, there was living in Hispaniola a certain Lucas Vasquez de Leon of Toledo, who had come there with Ovando, from whom he received the appointment of alcalde mayor, or mayor, right? Mayor of La Concepcion and other towns. He had now become one of the auditors of the island, and he was said to be a man of considerable intelligence, well educated and virtuous, according to the standard of the times, though unlearned in the arts of war, never having done a corslet or borne a sword to earn his wages therewith, says Oviedo, who was personally acquainted with him.
All right, remember this Lucas Leon. Leon is a Sephardic Jewish name. All right, this is a person of color.
He was very rich, having received from Ovando 400 Indians in repartimientos in payment of his salary, as was that time the custom. All right, so what are they talking about? Repartimiento. So the Spaniards, when they took over, settlements, Indian settlements, and they put them and grouped them wherever they had their missions or whatever, then they will distribute them. So repartir in Spanish is to distribute. So repartimiento is like a distribution of the Indians. So he got 400. That's a lot. Because I have, like in my country, this happened in 1569 in Costa Rica, where they put all the Indians in missions because we were living all spread out through the whole country. So they gathered us up and put us in different missions. Once they had us in the missions, they did their repartimientos. And I have a book with the list, the numbers they distributed to each Spaniard or colonist, right? And again, they call it repartimiento, and then it becomes an encomienda. So now you had an indentured servant, right? So this guy had, he got lucky. He got 400 Indians, right? That's a lot of servants, right? Stirred up, no doubts, by reports of kingdoms to be had for the mere asking, Leon associated himself with Diego Caballero, clerk of the Audiencia of the island, secured a license for his undertaking, and in 1520 dispatched a caravel from the port of La Plata having Francisco Gordillo as captain and Alonso Fernandez Sotil as pilot, with directions to sail northward until the continent was reached. All right, so remember, this is in, if you don't know, in Santo Domingo, which is in Hispaniola, Dominican Republic. All right, this is where they're talking about. All right, so it so happened that shortly before the departure of León's caravel, Juan Ortiz de Matienzo, another auditor of the same island, had sent out a caravel under the command of Pedro de Quejos in search of Caribs. All right, in search of what? Caribs to sell as slaves. Caribs to sell as slaves. All right, not Africans. You see, they put in all their time and effort, all their charters, everything they're being financed from their Spanish king and queen. All right. So look what they're enslaving. All right. Look where they're doing it. They're doing it here. What? Again, they're in search of Caribs to sell as slaves in virtue of the general license of October 30, 1503. That's what I was just talking about. All right. So a license to basically enslave Carib Indians, right? Not Africans, Carib Indians. In this traffic, the auditor's name did not openly appear, having failed to secure the intended cargo. Quejos' caravel was returning home when in the neighborhood of the island of Lucayonic, it fell with León's vessel, which apparently had been cruising about for several months on errands of which no account remains. So these errands, I wonder what they were. Were they enslaving American Indians? Is that what these errands were? That is not, there's no accounts of. Here the two commanders exchanged advices, and Quejos finally decided to sail with Gordillo for the mainland, intending, as it subsequently appeared, to fill his empty hold with slaves to go get Caribs, all right? So he joined up and to go to the mainland. They're talking about North America, the United States, like Florida and Louisiana, all these places, the mainland. To get what? To fill his empty hold with slaves, to get slaves. They ain't trying to colonize, they're going up there to get slaves. Sailing slowly northward for 8 or 9 days, or as some report, driven by stress of weather, in June of the year following Gordillo's departure in 1521, the two caravels came upon the continent in latitude 33 degrees 30, according to Quejos' testimony, at the mouth of a considerable river to which the name of St. John the Baptist was given, because of its discovery on the feast day of the saint. The Indians appear to have called the country Chicora, and it lay perhaps somewhere in the vicinity of Cape Fear. 20 men were sent ashore in the boats to secure the goodwill of the natives, the necessity of which León had impressed upon his commander, while the ship sought to enter the river. We're at this website called the historynewsnetwork.org. It says from Columbia College in Arts of Sciences, the George Washington University, the forgotten first attempt to plant a colony on U.S. soil. And this is going to correlate with what we just actually read in the book. We're going to go back to it, but I just wanted to show you this. It says in June 1526, Lucas Vasquez de León, a wealthy Spanish official in the city of Santo Domingo, Hispaniola, founded a colony near the mouth of the Petey River in eastern South Carolina. León's effort had been overlooked, perhaps because most people prefer to believe that the U.S. life began with the arrival of English-speaking Anglo-Saxons living under the British law. Perhaps its settlement is neglected because of its tragic fate, death by mismanagement, disease, and slave revolt. Perhaps it is unmentioned because of its unique...
All right, I just want to remind everybody right there when it says slave revolt, again, it was the Moors, as we read earlier, who went AWOL with the Indians that did the slave revolt. And then they bounced with the Indians and intermarried, as we read earlier, all right? So let's not forget that, these so-called slave revolts.
Unique rebirth in the woods by people not considered a worthy part of the U.S. heritage. León prepared for his great adventure in 1520 by sending Captain Francisco Gordillo, that's what we just read about in the other book, to locate a good landing site and build friendly relations with the local inhabitants. The captain instead teamed up with a slave hunter, Pedro de Quejos. You hear this? That's the other guy in the book, right? And Quejos, remember, had a license to enslave Carib Indians. It was a license he was given. It's not that he was just a slave hunter. He was given a license by the king. While failing to survey a site or build good relations with anyone, the two men captured 17 Native Americans. Captured who? 17 Native Americans, not Africans, and brought them back to Santo Domingo as slaves. The first European act on what is now U.S. soil was making slaves of free men and women. Again, the first European act on what is now U.S. soil, the first act ever by any European and American in the United States, all right, was making slaves of free men and women.
All right. So I just want to stop it there. That was deep information. You guys, I hope you heard that. So they were grabbing, American Indians, not Africans, again, North American, bringing them back to Santo Domingo, Hispaniola, right? And then they told us in school that when the local population would die out or escape, right, they would need to bring in so-called Africans or other Negroes to replenish them, right? Well, a lot of those are American Indians they're talking about, and they're undesirable Moors and Sephardic Jews, the Inquisition, people they didn't want over there in Europe.
Real quick, we're in this other book. It's called Lucas Vasquez, the Leon's Doomed Colony of San Miguel de Gualdape. This is from the Georgia Historical Quarterly, I guess volume 85. All right, so it says here, following Ponce de Leon's abortive 1521 attempt to establish a colony on the west coast of the peninsula of La Florida, Lucas Vasquez de Leon led a Spanish expedition that intended to found a colony in La Florida. But far north of Ponce de Leon's site, Leon was spurred on in this endeavor by the report of Captain Pedro de Salazar, a slave trader who happened upon a new and undiscovered land northwest of the Bahamas sometime between 1514 and 1516. Salazar spoke favorably on the desirability of the land itself and also brought back Indians. Brought back who? Indians, a slave, right? A slave trader. What was he trading? Or who was he enslaving? Indians of giant stature who commanded a high price in Española, which he was selling in Santo Domingo, Hispaniola, in the West Indies. All right, he was grabbing Indians from North America, bringing them to Hispaniola. He was a slave trader again. All right, so who were they slaving? They enslaving Africans. Based on Salazar's report, Leon sent an able navigator, Francisco Gordillo, in search of his utopian land, peopled by giant Indians. Gordillo was joined by a fellow pilot in another vessel, and the two ships departed Great Abaco Island on a northerly course in search of Salazar's reported discovery. In the latter part of July, Gordillo and Quejo returned to Santo Domingo with 60 tall Indians, slaves. All right, so they returned. So this is the same account. I guess it said 60 here, they said 70 over there, and glowing reports of the area around the Jordan River. All right, so these were the Chicori, maybe they were enslaving, the Chicori that you don't know about. This was the start of the Chicora legend, later embellished by Leon in the prolific writings of Martyr. They described Chicora as utopian land that did not require military conquest and could easily become a new Andalusia when colonized. You hear that? In the fall of 1521, Leon set about laying the groundwork to obtain permission and contract with the crown for establishing the colony. In this book, we talk about Leon's, voyage or expedition, right, to South Carolina. And it says that in the middle of July 1526, remember this is after 1524. And what did we get in 1524? We got Verrazano's account on how he described the Indians he met in La Florida, right, which he said they're basically just like Ethiopians, or as dark as Ethiopians, their skin, their complexion. All right, so 1526, all right, we're talking about the same people in the same area. All right, so he sailed from the port of La Plata on the northern side of the island of Hispaniola with a fleet of 6 vessels and a large boat for tender. His company consisted of 500 men and women, most of them gathered from the islands, whose white population was sensibly depleted by their departure. So he grabbed 500 men and women. I guess it depleted their population in those islands where they were. And he took with them 89 horses in addition to the necessary outfit for the colony. The pilot Quejos again accompanied him. Remember the slave trader Quejos. Among the colonists were a number of Negro slaves. Now we got in this account, or an original, a primary source actually, Negro slaves. All right, doesn't say anything about African. Negro slaves. All right, and so what is this proving to us again? That so-called Negro or African slaves, or just any people of dark skin, what you consider a Negro, were brought way before 1619. This is 1526, almost 100 years before. All right, 1526, we have accounts of Negro slaves being brought. How come they don't teach us this? Why they always telling us 1619? All right, that's a lie. Didn't you see it's all a made-up lie? It is well to remember that if to Catholic Spain is due the first introduction of Negro slaves, all right, so the Spanish were the first to introduce so-called Negro slaves, not English, in 1619 into the territory of the United States. So Allion, right, coming from Haiti, right here, Haiti right over here, the Caribbean, and going all the way up here, South Carolina, where it says Tierra de Allion. Look at this map, Tierra de Allion. All right. So, I mean, there's a whole history we don't know. Just wanted to cover that. All right. So we can continue.
All right. So that was the video. Make sure to get the whole video. It's a lot of good information. So we're going to go back to the website, Access Genealogy, and we were reading about Vasquez de Allion. All right. So again, so he brought up Moorish prisoners of war as slaves and American Indians as slaves. All these people revolted against him, or as they say here, went AWOL. And likely these Moors settled somewhere within the interior of Georgia and intermarried with the locals. Okay? The next part we have here is Hernando de Soto expedition. A lot of you have heard about this. At first, morale was high in this expedition, but as more and more soldiers began to be sniped off in guerrilla attacks, and no wealthy city like the Aztec capital of Tenochtitlan was encountered, desertions occurred. Most of the deserters were Moorish or sub-Saharan servants. Again, who was deserting? Now remember, Hernando de Soto came up with 600 soldiers. A lot of those deserters were again Moorish or sub-Saharan servants. The first desertion gave an extensive discussion by the authors of De Soto Chronicles occurred in the vicinity of Saluda, North Carolina, which was then called Suale or Guale or Shuale. They've changed this with an X and they also write this with a G, Guale or Shuale. The location was on the Blue Ridge Escarpment. A high-ranking female leader from the town of Cofitachiqui in southeastern South Carolina was being held hostage. She pretended to need to answer the call of nature, then escaped with one of the African servants dodged the hijack. What Africans? All right. Portuguese Sephardic Jews. While leaving Koza in northwest Georgia, De Soto lost at least 2 or 3 more men. Robles broke his leg when he fell off his horse and could not march. Another was Hidalgo, noble, name of Massano of Salamanca, who disappeared several days before the army departed. The other was a Moorish servant named Feriado, who intentionally slipped away from the Spaniards as they marched to the west. It is quite likely that De Soto lost several other common soldiers in the highlands because the Spaniards were enthralled with the terrain. Now you gotta understand why they're separating the Moors and they're trying to make them Africans only with the Spaniards, because they're talking about Catholics. When they say Spaniards here, De Soto, yeah, he represented the Catholic crown. And he was, even though he's a Sephardic Jew, he's a crypto. Other desertions in the region are not mentioned by the chroniclers until further along on the route. All right, so even in the De Soto expedition, a lot of Sephardic Jews and Moors and a lot of black Europeans were being left behind. All right, this is all before Jamestown and Roanoke, okay? All this is happening. These people are staying behind for years, all right? Before Roanoke and Jamestown, mixing with the local people. All right, next video I want to get into right here, because we're talking about Hernando de Soto, is a little bit of this video from 2 years ago. Who did the Spanish and Portuguese really enslave, all right? I'm going to talk about what Hernando de Soto, in the same expedition where Moors were being left behind, his soldiers and all these other people he had working for him stayed behind. We're going to see also what these people were doing and what he was forcing these people to do, and some of them didn't want to do this, I guess, right? If you haven't watched it, make sure to check it out. It's called Who Did the Spanish and Portuguese Really Enslave? Facts versus Fiction, Alex Haley Roots Hoax, all right? We're going to belly flop to about 30 minutes in. All right, we're going to be reading right away from this book, Indian Slavery in Colonial Times Within the Present Limits of the United States. A very scholarly book from the Columbia University, Studies in History and Economics and Public Law. by Alman Wheeler Lauber, PhD. We're going to get into it right now. What are they saying about Hernan de Soto?
In 1539, Soto himself landed in the Bay of Espiritu Santo in Florida for the purpose of conquest. He had served under Pizarro in Peru, and his methods were those learned from his master. So remember, Hernando or Fernando de Soto, right? He was under Pizarro when they conquered the Inca. And Pizarro was ruthless, cruel. So de Soto learned from his master, it says here. To ensure success, all opposition must be overcome. So with the expedition were taken bloodhounds, chains, and iron collars for the catching of holding of Indian slaves. Again, chains and iron collars. Iron collars for who? For Indian slaves, not Africans. The Spanish were not enslaving Africans. They were enslaving American Indians. I can't emphasize this enough. You know, perspective, orientation, the true slave trade. In reverse, the expedition was military in nature. Hence, it was natural that force and conquest should precede conciliation. There is no doubt that one of the purposes of Soto was to capture Indian slaves.
All right, just real quick. All right, so this was a military campaign De Soto was on, because Leon and all these other expeditions were failing and it was hard. And they saying, all right, send De Soto. He was there with Pizarro and they conquered the Incas. He should be able to conquer these people up here in North America. So they sent a military campaign. This wasn't an exploration or expedition. They called it expeditions. Most of the time, these were slave raids, military campaigns, as I just told you. All right, De Soto, who came with many Moors, De Soto himself being Sephardic Jewish Moorish as well. Crypto, convert, converso, new Christian.
He had chosen as his lieutenant a rich resident of the town of Trinidad in Cuba, Vasco Porcayo de Figueroa, who had come to Florida with the object of obtaining Indian slaves for his estates. All right, so remember, De Soto came in with 600 soldiers. All right, 600 soldiers. This included Moranos, Moriscos, black conquistadors too, not just Spanish white-looking Europeans. Soto himself was a slave owner. Among his possessions in Cuba were Indian slaves, whom he employed as herdsmen and in getting gold. In some cases, the Indian chiefs through whose territories Soto and his men were passing, everywhere they were passing, De Soto and his 600 men through their expedition in North America, all the way to the Mississippi from Florida. At other times, they both men and women were taken by force. Narrators relate the capture and distribution of such women in groups of 100 to 300 American Indian women and slaves. Among the captives were a queen and a cacique.
All right. Stopping it right there. What was De Soto doing in his expedition is literally a military campaign. Look how many American indigenous women they were grabbing. You just heard it. 100 to 300, groups of 100 of women. What were they doing with these women? Where were they taking them? Where was the men? Where was the men, guys? Come on. This is deep right here.
Still, other Spanish expeditions were nothing more than slave raids or kidnapping excursions. You see this, right? So these so-called expeditions, right? Most of them, probably all of them, were nothing more than slave raids or kidnapping excursions. They just changed the name. They put expeditions when they were really kidnapping excursions or slave raids. In 1520, Lucas Vasquez de Leon, listen to this, a wealthy resident of Hispaniola, determined to send out a ship for the purpose of exploring the section north of that covered by Ponce de Leon in 1513. His caravel met among the Bahamas a second ship sent out by another resident of Hispaniola to obtain Indian slaves. So their whole expedition was to obtain Indian slaves. These two vessels that had joined in the Bahamas and proceeded toward the continent, which they reached June 25th, 1521. in the neighborhood of the River Jordan, the present Santi or Cambahi, and the cape afterward called Cabo de Santa Elena. By gifts and proffers of friendship, the Indians were lured on board, and the ships, having obtained a full cargo, set sail for Hispaniola. So you see these two ships, they lured Indians when they got to that area of the U.S. up there in the East Coast. They lured the Indians on their ships, and then they took off with them to Hispaniola and enslaved them. Two ships full of Indians.
Real quick, we're in the National Park Service website, NPS.gov, an article here about Hernando de Soto, since we're talking about. And again, in 1539, Hernando de Soto, a veteran of Spanish conquest in Peru, landed on Florida coast with a fleet of vessels, a contingent of 600 men and 300 horses, a herd of pigs, some mules, bloodhounds, many weapons, and a large store of supplies. Again, remember, this is a military campaign. His goal was to conquer and settle the territory of the Gulf states, as well as find gold to enrich himself and his king. De Soto had no interpreter or guide, but he soon found a Spaniard living with a local tribe of Indians who, they were already there. His name was Juan Ortiz. They called him a Christian, and the primary sources, right, he was a converso, a native of Sevilla, all right? He was a Moor who had belonged to the 1528 expedition of Panfilo de Narvaez Ortiz, and 3 other men became the captives of a chief named Usita, who intended to kill them in retaliation for offenses Narvaez had committed. Ortiz survived by the intervention of the chief's daughter, who later aided his escape to a more hospitable village. While other Spaniards traded with the Indians, De Soto stole what he wanted, including precious stores of corn. He abducted Indian women for his soldiers and forced native men to haul his supplies. Remember, he was taking 100 to 300 women groups. All right, and look what he was doing for his soldiers. What were they doing with them? He humiliated chiefs by kidnapping them as guarantee for safe passage through their territory. As a final symbol of conquest, he planted Christian crosses in village plazas or atop the Indian sacred mounds. The army spent the winter near Tallahassee, Florida, then set off on a journey that marked the first entry of Europeans into the interior of the present-day southeastern United States. As De Soto's army entered the current region of southern Georgia, it was forced to cross a major river, likely the Flint. Spring rains had swollen the waterways to dangerous levels, but De Soto saw no alternative route. The army built a barge that they had pulled back and forth across the river, using a chain strung between the two shores. Twice the chain broke and the barge bounded out of control. Somehow, everyone crossed and the expedition headed north. Near the end of March, they reached the vicinity of present-day Macon, Georgia, possibly near the Lamar site. One native guy named Perico told the Spanish to travel 4 days east to find gold. Local Indians warned De Soto that to the east he would risk starvation on a large patch of uninhabited land. De Soto, lured by the promise of finding gold, chose to follow Perico's advice. Just as they had been warned, they found no people, food, or gold. The terrain was so desolate, they derided it as the Desert of Ocute. All right, the Ocute chiefdom. Okay, we're going to read about them. On the 5th day, they reached the Savannah River, swollen from spring rains, making crossing treacherous. Mounted soldiers rode across the water, lapping at the horse stirrups and saddlebags. The foot soldiers linked arms in a human chain, 30 to 40 feet long, and slowly pulled themselves across the raging river. Exhausted but safe on the other side, they faced another crisis. They were running out of food. De Soto ordered everyone to move faster, increasing their pace from 17 to 30 miles a day. They encountered more flooded rivers and often had to halt to build barges in order to cross. In late April, the soldiers reached the location of present-day Columbia, South Carolina. They were hopelessly lost. An Indian war chief, Patofa, and his warriors accompanied the Spanish, but they were little help as guides. Their goal was to find and fight their enemies, from a chiefdom called Cofitacheki. So this Patofa is from the Okuti, or later known Altamaha or Latama, sometimes known conventionally as the Oconee province, was a Native American paramount chiefdom. The Oconee Valley area was populated for thousands of years, and the core chiefdoms of Okute emerged following the rise of the Mississippian culture around 1100. Ocute was invaded by the expedition of the Spanish conquistador Hernán de Soto. All right, that's what we're talking about. In 1539, at that time, Ocute was locked in a long-standing war with the rival paramount chiefdom of Cofi-Tacheki in present-day South Carolina, okay? So they're going to tell you, this is what I'm saying, they actually joined up, all right? These people, this chiefdom, joined up with De Soto. They wanted to go to war with their enemies, their rivals, the Cofi-Tacheki. A little bit more down, it says, the people of Ocute spoke a language later known as Jamasi, apparently Muscovian tongue that may have been similar to Hichiti. All right, so let's go back. So these same people, right, they're saying an Indian war chief, Patofa, and his warriors accompanied, right, the Spanish or Hernán de Soto, but they were little help as guys. Their goal was to find and fight their enemies. All right. The Indians were as lost as the Spanish. On April 25th, a scout led the army to the village of Aimé, on the outskirts of the immense Cofi-Tacheki chiefdom that controlled most of what today is the eastern half of South Carolina, as well as parts of North Carolina. The war chief Patofa and his followers raided several villages, looted and desecrated temples, and killed and scalped their captives. This is what they did with the help of the Spanish. They were waiting. They took the opportunity. Their lust for battle satisfied, the Indians left for home. That's all they wanted to do. De Soto made his way to the chiefdom headquarters, reportedly near Camden, South Carolina. He camped on one side of a river and summoned a woman chief. All right, again, yeah, there was a woman chief over there. That was who their rivals were, a woman chief named the Lady of Cofi-Tacheki by the Spanish. She invited the strangers to her village, where she presented De Soto with gifts of animal pelts, blankets, pearls, salt, venison, and other food, and a cordial welcome and ceremony. De Soto demanded gold and silver, but was shown only copper and mica. As a result, he and his soldiers stormed to the top of a sacred mound and ransacked the temple. You hear that? Again, Hernán de Soto, Sephardic Jew. They found ornate chests containing the bones of honored ancestors, as well as animal skins, furs, and pearls. The Spanish stole everything valuable they could carry, then kidnapped the Lady of Cofi-Tacheki and headed north. They climbed through the mountains of North Carolina, where the Lady of Cofi-Tacheki managed to escape with some of the stolen pearls. All right? She actually did that by pretending she had to go to the bathroom. I have a lot of the primary sources translated in a great book I'm going to show you guys right now. So if you guys want to get the full accounts of that, great book right here says The Discovery and Conquest of Terra Florida by Don Fernando de Soto and 600 Spaniards, his followers. Who are these Spaniards, so-called Spaniards? A lot of these are Moors, Sephardic Jews. Believe that. Written by a gentleman of Elvis, employed in all the action and translated out of Portuguese. He was there, a primary source. Elvis was there. He saw everything, and he wrote it in Portuguese. All right, who was he? A Portuguese, Iberian, by Richard Haglio, reprinted from the edition of 1611. Okay, so make sure you get that. All that story is in here. You guys can read all that of Hernán de Soto, what he was doing. So again, we go back to Axis genealogy, and they were talking about Hernán de Soto's expedition as one of the examples of Moors being left behind. All right, Moorish or sub-Saharan servants. Most of the deserters, all right, deserters of Hernándo's expedition were Moorish or sub-Saharan servants. Again, we're reading the article, Castaways, Deserters, Refugees, and Pirates. They're getting into Fort Caroline here. Now, Fort Caroline was by the French, so-called French Huguenots. French Huguenots established this fort. So before we read this, right, about Fort Caroline, they're going to be talking about René de Landonnière, right? I just want to talk about who he is first, so we could understand, have a better perspective of who are we talking about. All right, as you guys can see, René Goulin de Landonnière was a French Huguenot. All right, French Huguenot. We're talking about a Moor, Huguenot, founder of the French colony of Fort Caroline, what we're about to read. It says Landonnière was a Huguenot, nobleman, and a merchant who's the merchants, mariner who's the mariner, mariners from Poitou, France. His birth date and family origins are currently unknown, you see? They're hiding who he is. These are cryptos. So again, we're going over the basics, all right, for all the new people and everybody, just to refresh your memory. What is a Huguenot? History of the Conquest of Spain by the Arab Moors, by Henry Coopy, Volume 2, 1892. This book is big. This is a part of the book, all right? Talking about Columbus and how he brought Moorish civilization and how his vessels was fitted out in that little port of Palos, which had lately been a Moorish port. His sailors were many of them men with Moorish blood in their veins. It has been asserted that when the Moors were driven out, thousands took refuge in the south of France, who afterwards, abhorring the Roman Catholic persecutions, became Huguenots. And that of these many emigrated at a later date to South Carolina. What are we talking about today? South Carolina, people going up there, on these expeditions. But what were they? Moors. Moors. They were driven out, they ended up in southern France, and they became known as Huguenots. We're in the book Jews and Muslims in British Colonial America by Elizabeth Hirschman and Donald Yates. It says both academic studies and informal family histories attest that many of the Spanish and Portuguese colonists in Central and South America, Mexico, and the Caribbean were conversos and moriscos. Although they might appear to be good Catholic Christians on the surface, right, de soto, they were in reality crypto Jews and crypto Muslims, secret Jews and secret Muslims. They practiced the traditions of Judaism and Islam in the privacy of their own homes, sometimes in small de facto communities or intermarried family groups. So, as you can see, a lot of these so-called Europeans were actually crypto Jews, crypto Muslims. They weren't just Catholic Christians, as they told us. Continues, says in 1764, an additional 300 Huguenot settlers arrived in hopes of developing the silk and wine industries. The same two Sephardic Moorish dominated industries attempted in the Virginia colony. Most of the incoming settlers were drawn from La Rochelle and Bordeaux, two French cities with large Sephardic Morisco populations. Earlier in the 1720s, Horisburg on the left bank of the Savannah River had been settled by around 800 French Swiss settlers, which we have argued elsewhere were primarily of Jewish and crypto-Jewish ancestry. Huguenots were descendants of Muslims in Europe. Huguenot history, descriptions, fate in Europe, and their occupations and skills, etc., are so integrally related to Muslims that it is not far-fetched to investigate their being Muslims. All right, this is from a website I had found back in my Huguenots video. Just wanted to show that world-famous silk textile technology of Al-Andalus reaches Britain through Huguenots. All right, so the Huguenots brought this influence to the colonies and to England. And you know, we all know that the Sephardic and Moorish people, the Moors, were in control of Europe and Spain, the Iberia Peninsula for many, many years. All right, these are many references to this. You can go study all of this. This is not me making things up. They were in control for many, many years, so they definitely multiplied. They had many, many families. And when the Inquisition came, they didn't just end up in Africa. Okay, that's hijacked. They went up again to France, Germany, England, Holland, Switzerland, and many other European countries, all right? So I hope you guys understand who the Huguenots are. We're going to go back. Remember that Lanaudier, the guy we're about to read about, was a Huguenot. Huguenot, okay? We're back in Access Genealogy website, and it says here Fort Caroline. Fort Caroline dispatched at least 6 small expeditions to explore the interior of the Southeast in order to develop trade ties. Most of the expeditions were targeted toward the Appalachian Mountains. Upon the arrival of 600 new colonists, René de Landonnière, the Huguenot, planned to establish the capital of New France at the head of the freight canoe navigation on the Oconee River. This is approximately the location of the University of Georgia today. You see that? The proposed town site was about 50 miles from the Georgia Gold Belt. This was most likely an Indian town where they built their fort, or was already their fort. Spanish forces attacked Fort Caroline on the night of September 20, 1565. So the Catholics came and attacked the Huguenots, who were Protestants, right? Cryptos. Most of the approximately 200 men in the garrison were killed. A handful escaped with the fort's commander, René de Laudonnière, right? They escaped, and he did, the Huguenot, right? Were either away from the fort on a trade mission to the Appalachian Mountains, the fort, when it was attacked. Two of the survivors lived with nearby natives until picked up by the French retaliatory raid in 1568. The best known of traders who were away as Pierre Gambier. He eventually married the daughter of a king. Listen to this. I'm talking about an Indian woman who, Pierre Gambier, these are Huguenots, married an indigenous princess, right? The daughter of a king. Then he became a king himself. And this happened many times, where they would become the chiefs after they married the daughter. And then in history, we just think of them as chiefs. But a lot of them are 100% Europeans or half Europeans. In this case, Huguenot. And he became chief, a Huguenot, a Moor. All right? A story survived that he was eventually assassinated, but other evidence suggests that he created this story to conceal his identity from the Spanish. All right? Fort Caroline, we'll get more into that. Continuing, says French Protestant refugees and privateers. Now, we already know the story of the Protestants. Back in the book, Jews and Muslims in British colonial America. Again, we're going over the information and corroborating with the website Access Genealogy. Going over real quick parts of this book. This is in chapter 2, Sephardim in the New World. It says Arbil also stresses that Sephardic Jews consider themselves one community, nation. Whether they openly practice their faith or were privately observant but publicly Protestant or Catholic, right? They were really Sephardic Jews. A little further ahead, it says here, Marcus series. This is what Jacob R. Marcus in his book, The Colonial American Jew, had to say. It says he emphasizes that many of the Iberian refugees publicly belong to Huguenot, Walloon, or other Protestant denominations. He also acknowledges the crypto-Jewish and openly Jewish Sephardic communities in the Netherlands were served as the seedbed for the large-scale return of the Jews to England beginning about 1650. All right, Protestants includes what? The crypto-Jewish Sephardic community, cryptos. Real quick, in chapter 5, this is about the New York colony, Dutch, British, and Jewish. Again, we read every single chapter of this book in different videos, so make sure to catch up to the presentations. We're going over the information and corroborating with that website, getting a deeper understanding so we can retain this and understand who the colonists were a lot of the time, and these were black folks. And over here it says in 1624, the West Indies Company made the decision to plant colonies in North America. Not surprisingly, given what we have already seen of the English strategy, the company used Sephardim as antagonists in the first onslaught. The earliest settlers were Walloons, Protestant refugees from the southern Netherlands who displayed willingness to risk wives and children towards immigration, as we have witnessed happening repeatedly from Roanoke to Jamestown, from Plymouth Rock and Boston to the shores of South Carolina and Maryland. Former Sephardim and Moors now surfacing in various hues of Protestantism were placed aboard ships and transported from Western Europe to North America. Again, they weren't coming from Africa, these Moors. Western Europe to America, Western Europe to America. A middle passage, but in a different way. How they told you, Sephardim and Moors transported aboard ships from Western Europe to North America. In addition to the Walloons came French Huguenots, who were also Moors, recruited by one Jesse de Forest Silva. All these incoming, ostensibly Dutch settlers received free passage and an allotment of land to cultivate on their own usage. All right, Who are the Protestants? You guys understand? This is chapter 6, Pennsylvania, Quakers and other friends. All right, that's the hijack with the whitewashing. Using immigrant records, church rolls, and family genealogies, we are going to paint a different picture of colonial Pennsylvania, one that includes many settlers of Sephardic and Ashkenazic Jewish, Ottoman, Turkish, and other types of Moorish descent. We are going to argue that prior historians have inadvertently overlooked or perhaps purposely ignored evidence that many of the Protestant sects arriving in Pennsylvania, example, the Mennonites, were crypto-Jewish congregations, all right, crypto-Jews, Sephardic Jews, people of color, led by a rabbinical style minister, all right? Protestants, who's the Protestants? We're in chapter 9 of this book. It says here, Georgia, the last colony. It says here, plot thickens, Plot thickens. Start right here. It says, one might ask, why Frenchmen were granted lands in Georgia at a time when Britain was engaged in a bitter struggle with France, one that would only end with that country's surrender and complete withdrawal from North America. Although these Frenchmen may have been outwardly Huguenots, who's the Huguenots, right? They were Moors. It is apparent from their names that they were Sephardic Jews, all right, and Jews underneath the Protestant veneer. They were just hiding under the Protestant veneer. Who's the Protestants? It says here, although the bulk of the refugees fled to North Africa in the Ottoman of Turkish lands, that's the hijack. No, they didn't. Thousands of others. How many thousands? Give us real numbers. Sought safety in France, in the Low Countries. As Protestantism swept across Western Europe, many of these Jewish conversos and Moriscos, Moors, became often only outwardly Protestant. Only outwardly, that was their cover. Who Moors? That was their cover, Protestant. Swelling the ranks of the dissenters, some even provided leaders for the Huguenots, Hussites, Anabaptists, Calvinists, German Reform, Walloons, Mennonites, Dunkards, Quakers, Puritans, and Presbyterians. When the British, Dutch, and French began establishing colonies on the Atlantic seaboard, they sent as colonists not subjects of high political and social rank from their respective countries, but for the most part recently arrived, patently anti-Catholic, newly minted Protestants, all right? So it was actually Moors and Sephardic Jews. Many were debtors, prisoners, or servants, casts of society who were struggling to get onto their own feet in a new country. All right. So we're back in accessgenealogy.com. Now they're talking about French Protestants. Now we understand, right, what that means. Moors, refugees, right, and privateers. According to documents that will be discussed in subsequent sections, several of the survivors of Fort Caroline established permanent residence in the Georgia mountains. So we just read about Fort Caroline. Those Huguenots, when they escaped, when everything was over, they settled in the Georgia mountains at the invitations of the kings of Appalachia and Ustanali. You see, they invited them over. Come stay with us. At the time, the majority of French mariners were Protestant. Who's these Protestants we just read, right? They were just outwardly Protestant. They were crypto-Jews, crypto-Muslims, or Moors. Many turned to privateering or pirating, right? Pirates, as a means of covertly combating the Catholic League in Spain. That's how they got back on the Catholics. They were raiding their ships, remember? Through the privateers operating off the Florida Straits, the Fort Caroline survivors got word back to France of a sanctuary for Protestants in the Appalachian Mountains. They were subjects of the Native American king of Appalachia, but persuaded him to become a Christian. Oh, be a Christian like us, really? Wow. Now remember who these Protestants are? This is very deep information. And see how they're settling with the people of the king of Appalachia and Ustanali. And what do you think they did? They definitely mixed with the women there. They had families. These were not white people. These were Moors, people of color, so-called Negro people that were mixing with American Indians. It's in a lot of people's ancestry. Now the article continues with this, which is about the Juan Pardo expeditions. This is a very good information we're going to read about right now. It says Juan Pardo expeditions to confirm the King of Spain's claim to the southern Piedmont and Appalachian Mountains. Pardo established a chain of small timber palisade forts in 1567. In the fall of 1568, Pardo never mentioned Appalachia in his report. The provinces that Pardo visited in the mountains were vassals of the king of Appalachia. He obviously did not have permission of the High King of Appalachia to build these forts. Just as Pardo arrived back at his home base in Santa Elena during early March, he learned that all of his forts had been massacred. At least that is the official story. Supposedly, only one soldier survived. In the following months, 3 Spanish forts at the mouth of the Altamaha River were wiped out by an army led by Dominique de Gorgues. Were all the soldiers in these garrisons killed, or did many go AWOL in order to pan for gold and marry native women? We don't know at this time, all right? We don't know, right? Check this out, guys. We're about to go read some interesting books and interesting information about Juan Pardo and his expeditions. All right, let's go. We're in the North Carolina History Online Resource, or ncpedia.org, regarding this article right here on Juan Pardo. Since the other website said they didn't have any information, we're going to dig it up a little bit. Now, Juan Pardo says here, the Indians of Watari, or Watari, Guatar, and first contact. The Watari Indians, or Watari Indians, lived in an influential settlement near Trading Fort and were led by a female chief. In 1567, again, they were led by what? A female chief. This is the same one De Soto's trying to kidnap, and the other people are helping, the other tribes are helping. In case you guys don't know, the Watari or Watari are a Siouan tribe. Siouan tribe, again, a lot of tribes you never heard of, and these are a lot of the tribes that were getting enslaved. Siouan tribe. Yes, people of color. In 1567, they encountered Spanish explorers led by Captain Juan Pardo, who came through the North Carolina Piedmont with grand hopes of creating a powerful empire. A 400-year-old secret lies undisturbed beneath the waters of the Yadkin. It is a secret about Rowan's earliest recorded history, about events that predate the county's founding by nearly 2 centuries. It is a secret about the first documented Christian missionary success in the southeastern interior, indeed in all of North America. What are they talking about? So very interesting what they're saying here, beneath the waters of the Yadkin. What is the Yadkin? That's a river which became kind of like a lake. Yeah, and there's something under there that they're hiding. 400-year-old secret, right? This is Yadkin Memorial Park, right, as you can see. So this is the dam right here. As you guys can see what happened, it flooded all this area right here. So they're saying there's actually something under there. And this is one of the colonial towns we're talking about today with Juan Pardo. All right, a little settlement here. It says it is a secret about Indians, the Watari or Watari, who lived in an influential settlement near Trading Fort and were led by a female chief. Again, female chief. It is a secret about Europeans, Spanish explorers led by Captain Juan Pardo, crypto Jews and crypto Muslims, who came through the North Carolina Piedmont with grand hopes of creating a powerful empire. The Watari or Watari welcomed the Spanish to their village in early February 1567. On that chilly winter day, the New World and the Old World came face to face on the banks of the Yadkin, and Rowan's documented history officially began. The Spanish arrival in Rowan preceded that of the Lost Colony, settlers on North Carolina's Roanoke Island, by 20 years. Go to the state archives in Raleigh and copy a Spanish document from 1569 offers this description of the Rowan County area and the Yadkin River at the point of first European contact in 1567. Now listen to what they had to say about this area right here. This is what the Moors said, right? This is what the Moors said. They're quoting the Moors, okay? It is rich land, a land of mountain ridges and flat tracts of arable land, good for all the crops of the world. Next to this place passes a very full river. They say that any sort of ship could sail more than 20 leagues up this river. Pardo himself wrote of Watari or Watery, which was the name of the Indians as well as their village. This land is one of the good lands that exist in the world. Pardo, who is Pardo? We're about to see. Again, Moors. Such descriptions impressed Pedro Menéndez de Áviles, governor of La Florida, the sprawling Spanish colonial territory that, according to Spain, included the entire southeast and all of the Atlantic coast. Menéndez was so taken by descriptions of Guattari or Watery that he intended it to be the site of his personal agricultural estate, a 5,500 square mile domain promised him by the crown. But the Spaniards' ambitious dream quickly withered in southern soil, and the native tribes, beset by European-born epidemics of smallpox and other diseases, faced sweeping disruptions in their way of life. The Watari would eventually leave the Yadkin area and ultimately take on a new identity. What is their new identity? That's a deep one right there. Remember, this is a Siouan tribe. Similarly, the colonial records noting the Spanish presence at Watari became quietly submerged beneath the waters of history. You see, they submerged this. Another town, another secret, something else they're hiding here. All these towns right under these lakes, because of these dams they're building all over the place. Future videos, we're going to talk about all these so-called black towns that are under the lakes, underwater. This is one of them, original ones. Unknown in the United States for centuries, documents would eventually be discovered, though detective work by American archaeologists would not work out an accurate route for part of southeastern expedition until the 1980s. Alright, so real quick before we continue with Juan Pardo. Now Pardo, the origin of the Pardo surname, very important here. I've mentioned it before, and it actually anglicizes into something very common in American names. Now Pardo says here, Hebrew is very old, surname of Sephardic Jewish origin, and that derives from the Greek and Latin name Pardus, which means leopard or panther, right? To later change to Spanish pardo, meaning brown. It means brown and referring to the color of the feline in Latin, Panthera pardus. Leopard nickname of this way because of those Jews who had the characteristic tan skin color. So now just real quick in this box, I just want to show you pardo, right? Brownish gray. Anglicization is brown. Brown. So the surname Brown, a lot of these Sephardic Jews and Moors who had the Pardo last name when they came to the Americas or when they went to Wales, England, Ireland, Scotland, they anglicized their name into Brown. They really didn't change it. They just anglicized it, right? Brown. Yeah, many of the Browns are actually Pardo ancestry. We're in the website findmyheritage.wordpress.com, says Sephardi Trees blog, list of Sephardic Jewish surnames. And Pardo, as you guys can see, is one of them, which means what? Mulatto. Mulatto, brown. Pardo, the color brown, drab, dark. All right, and then it goes into cloudy, flat, dull voice, but literally brown or mulatto or a dark color. The color brown, mulatto, brown, pardo. Real quick, back in the book, Jews and Muslims in British colonial America. Remember, we learned this in this book. Again, this is another refresher. It says here, owing to its central location, Puerto Rico was subjected to repeated depredations by French, who's the French, English, these are literally just tags, and Portuguese privateers, right? English privateers, French privateers, they're all the same. Who's the privateers? Remember, who's these pirates? They were going after the Catholic ships. A fort was built by the Spanish settlers from 1530 to 1540 to defend the island. Spanish officials on the island during the late 1500s included the following: Menéndez de Valdez, Pedro Suarez Pedro, Telo de Guzman Pardo de Osario, Antonio Calderon, Antonio Mosquero, and Juan de Haro. These surnames further suggest that the island was Sephardic and Moorish community. Okay? Pardo. Continues as the surnames in the Puerto Rico sample are strongly suggestive of Converso, Morisco backgrounds: Bautista, Benitez, Bernal, Betancourt, Borges, Candelaria, Carrero, Casillas, Castellano, Castello, Colón, Córdoba, Correa, Cruz, de Gracia, de Jesus, de las Reyes, Diaz, Espinosa, Phoebus, or Phoebus, Farbus, Forbes, Ferrer, Flores, Garcia, Guzman, Jimenez, Leon, Lopez, Marrero, Maisonnet, French Maisonnet, Medina, Arabic, Mendes, Miranda, Muniz, Navarro, Nieves, Oliveras, Olmeda, Ortega, Padilla, Pardo, Perez, Reyes, Robes, Romero, Rosie, Santiago, Santos, Vega, Janes, and Sayas, Morisco, Converso Morisco names. Again, in another part of the book it says other Sephardim carry Berber surnames. For example, Ohana, O'Hara, O'Kenine, O'Soline, Malkar, Nar, Montel, Tavora, Pardo, which is brown, right, is brown, same family. Nechem, Abban. Continues, says among the Sephardic surnames in the Caribbean identified by Arbel R, and it lists all these, so I ain't gonna read them all now no more. Then we got Pardo down here, right? Again, Pardo. All right, now it's gonna talk about what we're reading today about Juan Pardo. It says in this book, right, Jews and Muslims in British colonial America. It says, finally in 1566, the Spanish succeeded in establishing the Santa Elena colony near the present-day border of South Carolina and Georgia at Beaufort. The settlers numbered 1,500 men and 14 women. All right, 14 women compared to 1,500 men. Do you guys hear that? So how were they going to multiply? They needed other women, right? They couldn't do it with just 14 women. I mean, they could, but that would be crazy, right? So they went to the local women, remember. 1,500 men compared to 14 women only. So you know they took on wives. From Santa Elena, Captain Juan Pardo, Sephardic surname Brown, Sephardic surname Brown, set off 2 expeditions, establishing forts as far westward as Knoxville, Tennessee. Santa Elena was a thriving seaport colony with craftspeople, families, and a Morisco pottery-making facility. You guys hear that? Santa Elena craftsmen and merchants traded with Mexico, Italy, and Spain. They never taught us none of this stuff in school. They want us to think that there was nothing there before Roanoke or before Jamestown. Some even owned Chinese porcelain. They were trading far and wide. Soldiers stationed in the town were drawn from a cross-section of Spain: Marchena, Gibraltar, Cadiz, Sevilla, Bilbao, León, Salamanca, Toledo, and Palencia. Notably, all areas with substantial Sephardic and Morisco populations. Those were Moorish towns. A list of names of settlers is given in Appendix J. As is readily apparent, most are almost certainly Sephardic Jewish or converso families, okay? So you guys kind of get the point. As it says here, Pardo, Spanish, Portuguese, brown, mulatto, panther, Black Panther, from here, man, from El Pardo, Spain, Pardo, brown, mulatto. This is another book. It's called The Melungeons, The Resurrection of a Proud People. An untold story of ethnic cleansing in America by N. Brent Kennedy with Robin Vagan Kennedy. And I'm going to go to chapter 2, and it says, in the beginning, no one really knows when the Melungeons were first discovered, although by the time Tennessee Governor John Sevier encountered them in August 1784, their numbers were apparently substantial. They lived in sizable communities, primarily on the upper ridges of the eastern Tennessee, counties of Hancock, Hawkins, and Rhea, and Ashe, Johnsey, Surrey, and Allegheny counties in western North Carolina, and in what are now Wise, Scott, Lee, and Dickinson counties in southwestern Virginia. According to Lewis Davis of the Nashville Tennessean, the so-called Melungeons were dark-skinned people, okay? Dark-skinned people, reddish-brown complexion people, supposed to be of Moorish descent. Moorish descent, who were neither Indian nor Negro, but had fine European features and claimed to be Portuguese. All right, Portuguese Moors, like I said. More precisely, it was Portuguese, as they themselves pronounced it. They claimed descent from a group of Portuguese who had either been shipwrecked or otherwise abandoned on the Atlantic coast. Abandoned. Remember, all these people who are fleeing, all these forts. We just got all these expeditions, right? It is important to know that regardless of where the individual pockets of these people dwelt, the same Portuguese origin was consistently offered to explain their existence. All right, so now I'm going to belly flop to page 104 of this book. It says, meanwhile, in the New World. This here, Joseph Judge in the March 1988 issue of National Geographic beautifully describes the everyday life of the Santa Elena colonists. from their tradition of worship to their relationships with the various surrounding Native American tribes. Judge's article also touches on the exploits of one Spanish officer, Juan Pardo, who is probably at least one of the keys to the Melungeon scenario. Dr. Chester DePrater of the University of South Carolina's Institute of Archaeology and Anthropology, a Melungeon Research Committee member, along with his highly respected colleague, Dr. Stanley South, are key members of the research team excavating Santa Elena. The Juan Pardo connection. In 1566, Captain Juan Pardo, a Spanish officer, most likely of Portuguese origin, recruited some 200 soldiers, probably from the mountains of northern Spain and Portugal, that is the Galician mountains, and brought them to the Santa Elena colony. Pardo assigned these soldier settlers, remember these prisoners of war, Moors, remember? To a series of 4 or perhaps 5 forts in northern Georgia, western North Carolina, eastern Tennessee, or a combination thereof, depending on the interpretations of various scholars studying the question. Historian J.G. Hollingsworth, for example, suggests that Pardo left 30 soldiers in a fort located in what is now Surry County, North Carolina, part of the old Indian territory of Shula, or Guara, as it was called by the Spanish, the Guara, Guatari. More intriguing is Hollingsworth's contention that the Spanish continued to operate a fort and a mine as late as 1670 near present-day Lincolnton, North Carolina. Although these Spanish would of necessity have been neither new arrivals or descendants of Pardo soldiers settlers. In any event, Pardo left these soldiers with orders to hold the land for King Felipe and His Holiness the Pope, and then Pardo returned to Spain. 2.5 years later, he once again sailed to the Santa Elena colony, this time possibly bringing the wives and children of a number of these soldiers. Santa Elena, after all, was to be a permanent settlement, and a permanent settlement required more than a single male soldiers. So they're making up about the wives, possibly, right? Remember, they brought all males. They needed women. Yes, they got the Indian women. What is of great interest here is that if these soldiers were indeed recruited from either the Galician mountains or southern Spain, then there is every likelihood that they and their families were of mixed Berber, Jewish, and Basque heritage, while they were undoubtedly conversos, cryptos, and practicing believing Catholics or new Christians. Spain's policy was to send only Catholics to settle new territories. They conceivably could have been less than equal citizens in Spain and Portugal intent on reconquest. Even more importantly, they also would have been far easier recruits for resettlement in the New World than the so-called native Iberians or those who more pure or wealthier families. Again, they're letting you know these are the ones they were trying to get rid of: the Inquisition, the Moors, and the Sephardic Jews. Indeed, in 1568, just 1 year after their immigration to Santa Elena, the Inquisition against the Moors went into high gear. It is quite possible that these soldiers and their families saw the writing on the wall and took advantage of an opportunity to leave before the going got even tougher. That young Christian men of Moorish origin were being recruited for the New World service is well known. As Fernand Braudel puts it, in the 16th century, Seville and the Andalusian hinterland, still half Muslim and hardly half Christian, were engaged in sending their men to settle whole areas of Spanish America. Moors. They were sending Moors to settle America. These areas still bear the mark of their origins. Carlos Pereira, Pereira became Perry. Anglicized version of Pereira is Perry, has perfectly described it. Spain sent all her sons down to this southern region, opening onto the sea. Although it may be pure coincidence, the darker-skinned Spanish and Portuguese recruits assigned to Brazil and the Caribbean during this same time period were known as Pardos, a different classification from either Negroes or mulattoes, both categories utilized by the Spanish military. While Pardo can today be translated as black or dark, again, what does Pardo mean? Black or dark. Could the term have originated with Juan Pardo? Or more likely, could Juan Pardo himself have been of Moorish or Jewish origin, with his name originating from the term? Whatever was the situation, the idea of a connection is an intriguing possibility, better left to qualified historians and linguists. Continues, says David J. Weber, in his brilliant historical study of the Spanish frontier in North America, unlike some others in his field, at least leaves open the question regarding Pardo settlers. Unlike De Soto, Pardo planted settlement along the way. He built a chain of 5 small fortifications, with a detachment assigned to each one. Pardo returned safely to Santa Elena, but his path of garrisons disappeared. Their few defenders either killed by Indians or absorbed into the Indian tribes. Continuing in the book, it says here in chapter 6, putting it all together, he says, I contend that the remnants of Joao or Juan Pardo's forts, joined by refugees from Santa Elena, remember these are all Moors and Sephardic Jews, and possibly a few stray Dominicans and Jesuits, exiled Moorish French Huguenots. Moorish French Huguenots. We can't make this up. Why is this book saying the same thing that we've been saying, right? Moorish, the French Huguenots are Moors. Moorish French Huguenots and escaped Acadians. Who are the Acadians? Check out my Acadian video. They're Huguenots too. These were black folks as well. Along with Drakes and perhaps other freed Moorish Iberian captives. All right, we're going to get into Drakes again. Survived on these shores. Combined forces over the ensuing years moved to the hinterlands, intermarried with various Carolina and Virginia Native Americans, and eventually became the reclusive Melungeons. You hear that? So a lot of these Moorish Sephardic runaways or settlers that survived, escaped, dissenters, ex-prisoners of war, ex-soldiers, they kind of all got together because they kind of were the same people. And they eventually moved to the higher lands, intermarried with various Carolina, Siouan and Virginia, Powhatan, Algonquin, Muskogee-speaking tribes, right, women, and eventually became the reclusive Melungeons. I, as strongly contend that the Moorish element was, at least in the beginning, the predominant one. All right, the Moorish element was the predominant one in the beginning, explaining why the probably Moorish self-descriptive term Melungeon came to be associated with the various population regardless of their location. The gene frequency data we have supports just such a heritage, and the circumstantial evidence, in the words of Press Officer Luis de Souza at the Portuguese embassy in Washington, is quite credible and quite convincing. Certainly, if Drake's Moors, we're going to get into Francis Drake, all right? Moors were primarily men. As we know, they were the tendency for their children to adopt the father's heritage would be, 1, strong, given the patrilineal tradition of the Moors, and 2, as a result of this tendency, would better explain the widespread dissemination of the so-called Melungeon heritage. Several hundred Moorish men could leave quite a genetic and cultural heritage after but 1 generation, to say nothing of the estimated 14 generations since their arrival. Additionally, the accompanying claim to be Portuguese fits with both the South American Moors and the Pardo Santa Elena component as well. Portuguese or not, it would have been the smartest politically correct heritage for either group to claim, given the circumstances of the time. All right, so I know exactly what that means. So if you have so-called Portuguese in your heritage, it actually, most likely is a crypto Jew, a crypto Muslim, Morisco. So again, we've just been going over Access Genealogy, this article, the great article they have here, just to mention some of the things people may not know: castaways, deserters, refugees, and pirates. And this whole time, they've been letting us know that a lot of these were Sephardic Jews and Moors, Black Europeans that were being left behind in colonial times and assimilating with the local population. So now we're going to be talking about Dominique de Gourgues' expedition, 1568. De Gourgues' 2-ship fleet temporarily anchored off the south coast of Cuba in early November 1568. De Gourgues is totally silent about where he was and what he did until he rendezvoused in mid-April at a pre-designated anchorage on the Medway River in Georgia. The location of the village of Takaturu The location was near present-day Midway, Georgia, 24 miles south of present-day Savannah. All of the forts built by Pardo were destroyed during this period of the Gorgie's silence. The systematic destruction of Spanish power north of San Agustin suggests that some Europeans were operating as advisors to native provinces in the interior. The Gorgie's report to the king leaves many unanswered questions. All right, so what does Wikipedia say about Dominique de Gourgues? It says he was born around 1530. 1583 was a French nobleman and soldier. He is best known for leading an attack against Spanish Florida in 1568. So just want to point out that most likely he is a Huguenot. We're going to see that. And also that he was attacking not specifically Spanish, because a lot of them are Spanish or French, but the Catholics, who was at constant war with them. And he did that in response to the destruction of French Fort Caroline, right? That's the one we read about already, which was founded by René Goulain de Lanaudière. Remember, Lanaudière was a Huguenot. So he was mad at what happened there. We're going to read what happened, all right, and how he got revenge. I want to read down here real quick. It says, situation in the colonies. Philip II of Spain. I touched the hijack with this whitewash image. What are you talking about, Cootie Mel? It says he was a Roman Catholic, so he was with the Catholics, right? This is Charles V's son. Charles V is a so-called black man. So the one they're showing us here is definitely not him. So he was a Roman Catholic king who hated Protestants. Who's the Protestants? He hated who? The cryptos, the crypto Muslims, crypto Jews, the new Christians, the convert. He hated them. Remember, they were persecuting the Catholics. The Inquisition was all about getting rid of them. And even if they hid under Protestantism or these other names, they knew who they were. That's why they hated Protestants, including the French Huguenots. Again, who's the Huguenots? Moors, right? The Catholics are after the Moors and the Jews of Spain and Portugal. Of course, they're going to hate the Huguenots and the Protestants. That's the same people. And he considered them heretics because, again, they're not Catholics. They're not really Christians. It's just outwardly. Remember? They were still practicing their beliefs, their Muslim and Jewish beliefs. He ordered his troops to kill any they found in the colonies. So this is the war that I'm talking about. You know, Catholics are going after the Protestants and Huguenots and all these people because they're Moors and Sephardic Jews. Therefore, in 1565, troops under Pedro Menendez de Aviles notoriously massacred hundreds of Frenchmen around Fort Caroline in what is now, and this is wrong, it's not in Jacksonville. They got this wrong in Wikipedia. We already read where it was located. After capturing the fort and slaying nearly all his prisoners, Menendez hung their bodies on the trees with the inscription, not as a Frenchman, but as Lutherans. So he's saying, I didn't kill them because they were French, but because they're, you know, because they're cryptos. They're not really Christians or so-called Lutherans. The massacre aroused indignation in France among the Protestants and Catholics alike. The French king sent complaints to the Spanish court, but Menendez and his associates, instead of being punished for the deed, received rewards and honors. I just want to read the overall story to you guys. Now it says here, revenge. We just read about Dominique de Gourgues, right? Expedition to French Florida. Embittered by the cruelty and indignity that he had suffered from the Spaniards, the Catholics, de Gourgues determined to avenge the murder of his Protestant compatriots. He was a Protestant. He is a Huguenot. He is a Protestant. He's a crypto Jew, crypto Muslim. Though he was himself a Catholic, he had converted though. He had to survive. He sold everything he had and borrowed money from his brother Antoine to recruit a crew and chartered 3 ships. He sailed to Cuba with 200 men, never telling them the goal of their trip. Listen to where they went. Listen to what he was doing. Once in Cuba, he made his intentions clear and his crew approved his choice of revenge. Gourgues then moved to attack Spanish-held Fort Caroline. So the Catholics had murdered the original people that were in Fort Caroline, which was the Huguenots, right? So now they had control of the fort, and the Gourgues came. He moved and attacked this fort, which they had renamed as Fort San Mateo, enlisting the aid of Fort Caroline's old allies, the Saturigua. Who's the Saturigua? Were a Timucua chieftain, and then the Takatakuru was a Timucua chieftain as well. So these Indians helped Gorgie, right, the Huguenot, the Protestant, all people of color against other people of color, Catholics. Again, with the help of clans of the Timucua Indians, the fort soon surrendered to the Gorgie's forces. The French and Indians killed the Spanish prisoners in retribution for Fort Caroline and other massacres of Protestants. They hated the Catholics because of what they had done to their people, this war they were having. They're being persecuted by the Catholics ever since they left Iberia. They hanged the prisoners with the inscription, not as Spaniards, but as murderers. Whoa. All right, Hane, that's the source. Go check that out. So you see they got them back. We didn't kill them because they were from Spain, because that's our ancestry too. We killed them because they were murderers. They came and killed the Huguenots there first. Remember? Again, I know a lot of people are new to this. They might have never known that the Huguenots were Moors. Just going over some information here that we've gone over many, many times. This is the book History of the Conquest of Spain by the Arab Moors by Henry Copy, written in 1892. We're on page 445. And right there, they're talking about Christopher Columbus and how he believed only Moorish civilization was good, and that his vessel was fitted out in that little port of Palos, which had lately been a Moorish port. His sailors were many of them men with Moorish blood in their veins. It has been asserted that when the Moors were driven out, thousands took refuge in the south of France, who afterwards, abhorring the Roman Catholic persecutions, became Huguenots. Who became Huguenots? Moors. Moors when they were driven out. Moors, right? Moors when they were driven out of Spain and Portugal. They ended up in southern France, became known as Huguenots, right? They're being persecuted by the Catholics. So this is a beef they had. Huguenots are Moors and Sephardic Jews as well. So when they're telling us Dominique de Gourges took revenge on the Catholics for his Huguenot or Protestant compatriots, that's his people, Moors. I want to read from this book now. It's called The Lily and the Totem, or The Huguenots in Florida, the Moors in Florida, 1562 to 1570, a series of sketches, pictures, and historical of the colonies of Coligny in North America, University of California, This is written from 1850. This was written in 1850. Just real quick, in chapter 1, they're talking about the first voyage of revolt. This was like one of the first Huguenots that came into Florida. It says here the Huguenots, or the Moors, right? In plain terms, in very plain terms, were the Protestants of France. Who's the Protestants? They were a sect which rose very soon after the preaching of the Reformation had passed from Germany into the neighboring countries. In France, they first excited the apprehensions and provoked the hostility of the Roman Catholic priesthood. You see, because these were Moors and Sephardic Jews, they were at war with them. During the reign of Francis I, this prince, unstable as water, and governed rather by his humors and caprices than by any fixed principles of conduct, wanton, perhaps equally in the head and heart, showed himself in the outset of his career rather friendly to the reformers. But they were soon destined to suffer, with more decided favorites from the caprices of his despotism. The Huguenots were not originally known by this name. It does not appear to have been one of their own choosing. That's not what their name was. It was the name which distinguished them in the days of their persecution. Remember, it meant a confederation, a coming together of comrades. All right, look up the etymology of Huguenot. You'll see it. Confederacy. Again, it distinguished them because of their persecution. Their persecution. Who's being persecuted? The Moors and Sephardic Jews from Spain and Portugal by the Catholics, the Holy Roman Emperor. Right? Who? Another so-called black man, Charles V. So we go to chapter 25. Yeah, 25. Dominique de Gourgues. Early history of Gourgues. The tidings of the fearful massacre of the Huguenots in Florida, as well in Spanish as in French accounts, at length reached France. Deep was the feeling of horror and indignation which they everywhere excited among the people. Catholics, not less than Protestants, felt how terrible was the cruelty thus inflicted upon humanity, how insolent the scorn thus put upon the flag of the country. Wild and bitter was the cry of anguish sent up by the thousands bereaved widows and orphans of the murdered men. But this cry, this feeling, this sense of suffering and shame awakened no sympathies in the court of France. The King Charles IX heard the supplication of the wives and children of the sufferers without according any answer to the prayer. The blood of nearly 900 victims, 900 people in Fort Caroline. Do you guys hear that? That's how many people, the Catholics, right, Charles V's people, went in there and murdered nearly 900 people. Cried equally to earth and heaven for vengeance, and cried in vain to the earthly sovereign. He had no ear for the sorrows and the wrongs of heresy, and the plight of humanity was stifled in the supposed interests of religion. Charles was most regally indifferent to a crime which relieved him of so many troublesome subjects, and was at that very time meditating the most summary processes for still farther diminishing their numbers. He was yet to provide an appropriate finish to such a history of massacre and the bloody tragedy of St. Bartholomew. All right, check out my Huguenots video. We went over the whole history of what happened to the Huguenots and Protestants, you know, how they were being massacred. But remember, I just want to remind you that eventually Oliver Cromwell, right, he was a Protestant, so they did the same thing to the Catholics when they were in power, you know, and that's when they got rid of the Jacobites. The Jacobites were Catholic, and these were black folks too. So don't think we're talking about white and black, because we're talking about Catholics and Protestants. But if the court of France demanded no redress for the massacre of its people, and that of Spain offered none, either address or apology, there was yet a deep and intense passion dwelling in the heart of the one nation, and yearning for revenge upon that of the other. There was still a chivalrous feeling in France, which showed itself superior to the exactions of sect or party, and which brought it with terrible intensity over the bloody fortunes of the French in Florida. This moody meditation at length found its fitting exponent. The sentiment that stirs earnestly in the popular heart will always, sooner or later, obtain a fitting voice, and where it burns justifiably for vengeance, it will not long be wanting in a weapon. The avenger arose in due season to satisfy the demands of justice. All right, so this is what they're talking about. So this is the background of Dominique de Gourgues, right? Before he did his expedition, so-called expedition, he was on a mission. He was on a military campaign to get rid of the Catholics. And remember, and he allied with Timucua Indians. All right, so there is part of history too, an important thing to understand. All right, a little more ahead in the book, it says here in part 8, it says the conquest of La Caroline. The Chevalier de Gourgues now proposed temporarily to rest from his labors and give himself a reasonable time before attempting the superior fortress of La Caroline. All right, it says here the Indians meanwhile had been ordered to environ the fortress and so to cover the whole face of the country as to make it impossible that the garrison should obtain help, convey intelligence of their situation to their friends in St. Augustine, or escape from the beleaguered station. So they had the Timucua Indians that are again helping and making sure nobody escapes the fort, none of those Catholics or the people working for them. All right, so after they capture the fortress and they go in, he describes how they did it, where they stationed, how they got in. You know, it's a very good book if you want to read it. I'm just jumping to certain sections. It says the captured fortress was one with a singular facility and with so little loss to the assailants as to confirm them in the conviction that the service was acceptable to God. But his vengeance was not complete. The final act of expiation was yet to take place, and bringing all his prisoners together, he had them conducted to the fatal tree upon which the Spaniards had done to death their Huguenot captives. He's going to take revenge. This was at a short distance from the fortress. Mournful was the spectacle that met the eyes of the Frenchmen, or the Huguenots, or the Moors, right, as they reached the spot. There still hung the withered and wasted skeletons of their brethren. They still had the skeletons there of the Huguenots or the Moors. The Catholics did, right? So-called Catholics. Naked, bare of flesh, bleached and rattling against the branches of the thrice accursed tree. The tempest had beaten wildly against their wasted forms. The obscene birds had preyed upon their carcasses, some had fallen, and lay in undistinguished heaps upon the earth. But the entire skeletons of many unbroken still waved in the unconscious breezes of heaven. For 2 weary years had they been thus tossed and shaken in the tempest. For 2 years had they thus waved, ghastly, white, and terrible, in mockery of the blessed sunshine. And now, in the genial breezes of April, they still shook aloft in horrible contrast with the green leaves and the purple blossoms of spring around them. But they were now decreed to take their shame from the suffering eyes of day. A solemn servant was set over the wretched remains, which were taken down with cautious hands, as considerately as they were still accessible to her, and buried in one common grave. The red man looked on wondering and in grave silence, and Holata-Kara, leaning upon his spear, might almost be thought to weep at the cruel spectacle. But his aspect changed when the Spanish captives were brought forth. They were ranged, manacled in pairs, beneath the same tree of sacrifice. Briefly and in stern accents did Gorgias recite the crime of which they had been guilty, and which they were now to expiate by a sufferance of the same fate which they had decreed to their victims. Prayers and pleadings were alike in vain. The priest who had performed the solemn rites for the dead now performed the last duties for the living judged. He heard their confessions. One of the wretched victims confessed that the judgment under which he was about to suffer was a just one, that he himself with his own hands had hung no less than 5 of the wretched Huguenots. He was proud of it, you see that? He killed 5 Moors. With such a confession ringing in their ears, it was not possible for the French to be merciful. At a given signal, the victims were run up to the deadly branches, which they themselves had accursed by such employment, and even while their suspended forms riddled and quivered with the last fruitless efforts of expiring consciousness, the chieftain Holata-Kara looked upon them with a cold, hard eye, stern and tearless, as if he felt the dreadful propriety of this wild and unrelenting justice. The deed done, the expiation made, Gorgias then procured a huge plank of pine, upon which he caused to be branded with a searing iron in rude but large intelligible characters these words, corresponding to that inscription put by the Spaniards over the Huguenots, and as fitting commentary upon it. These are not hung as Spaniards, nor as mariners, or as Moors, right? But as traitors, robbers, and murderers. Traitors, a lot of them were Moors who had converted to Catholics. Traitors, robbers, and murderers. They had killed the Huguenots, his people. Okay? So I just wanted to read, how deep this was, because an Access Genealogy website, they don't really tell us much. We're just talking about a more on more war here. Shout out to Drop Nation, Drop, what we call today so-called black on black crime. All right, so we're back in Access Genealogy, free genealogy website. Great article we're reading. Castaways, deserters, refugees, and pirates. All right, so we just read about Dominique de Gorgias' expedition and his revenge for his Huguenot Moorish people. Now we're going to read about the Jewish pirates of the Caribbean. Yeah, you guys know about that. We've done a couple videos on that. Let's read what it says here. It says in 1580, Spain and Portugal became one country. There had officially been no Jews in Portugal since 1497, officially, right? They were cryptos, when all were forcibly baptized. However, the King of Portugal did not harass Jewish families, who continued to keep a low profile with their religious practices, because he needed their mercantile expertise. All right, they had all the ports, all the networks, all the trade going. These were business people, and they helped run the commerce in the kingdom. The crypto Jews in Portugal knew, however, that the Inquisition would soon follow annexation. They established trade networks in Brazil, Colombia, and the Caribbean basin, then migrated to the Americas by the hundreds, perhaps thousands. Yeah, thousands. Again, we got very thorough videos on these very topics of how Sephardic Jews and the Moors had a trade network in all these places. They were called port Jews. They were the merchants, the seafaring captains, the pirates. all that. There was a large concentration of Portuguese crypto Jews in Puerto Rico, Barbados, Jamaica, and the Bahamas. This probably explains why both the ships of Roanoke Island Colony and the later Jamestown Colony were able to anchor in southern Puerto Rican harbors for many days in order to replenish supplies and rest. At that time of the Roanoke Colony, Spain and England were at war. They weren't supposed to go over there. So you see what they're telling you, because Roanoke, as we know, was also Sephardic and Moorish colonists. They were the same people, cryptos. Those Portuguese Jews living in the Bahamas and Jamaica were in ideal situations to trade with the embryonic colonies on the mainland of North America. It is suspected that many of the handfuls of Spaniards who established rural haciendas in Florida were really cryptic Jews seeking isolation from the Inquisition. However, many more were lured by the quicker profits and hatred of Spain to become pirates, all right? They became pirates because they hated the Catholics, so they were raiding their ships. The real pirates of the Caribbean here, okay? The Jewish pirates of the Caribbean attacked and plundered the Spanish fleet while forming alliances with England and the Netherlands to ensure the safety of Jews living and hiding in the New World. They waited off the Florida and Georgia coast to spring on treasure-laden galleons that were plodding up the Gulf Stream. They were probably the pirates who raided the Spanish coastal missions in Georgia. Okay, these are your pirates, Sephardic Jews and Moors, cryptos, because they maintained illegal operations on a regional scale just off the coast of the southeast. The Jewish pirates were in an ideal situation to operate gold and silver mines in the Appalachians without the king's approval. They also could have easily transported religious refugees to the coast, all right, their brethren, religious refugees, to the coast, and arranged for safe passage through the native provinces between the coast and the mountains. You see, the Moors and Sephardic Jews were in America, and they were living amongst the Indians. All right, so real quick, I'm gonna get into this video right here that I've done. It's part 8 of my series, Nations of the World. Make sure to catch that series. Very good, informative videos. The Sephardic Moorish real pirates of the Caribbean, Buccaneers. As you guys can see, this little drawing right here, that was drawn by my son. We're gonna get into some parts of this video real quick. Crypto Jews, crypto Muslims. All right, under the Dutch banner, under Portuguese banner, under Spanish banner, under Irish or English. So we're gonna get into this book, and you know, the cover, just the cover alone already explains a little bit. All right, so it says the story begins with Columbus and the Age of Discovery, when secret Jews sailed with the explorers, marched with the conquistadors, and were among the first settlers in every new world colony. Again, they were what? Amongst the first settlers. This is very significant. This is, as we keep researching, we're going to see, well, we go to every settlement, every first colony here in America, you know, every place that was colonized, and we're going to find these people. We're going to find Sephardic Jews, Morisco, crypto, Moors, all that. We're going to find them here, settling in, getting into their trade, getting in their business, whatever they were doing, sugar, trying to survive, trying to be able to practice their own, beliefs, all that in the New World. And they were the pioneers. All right, this early history is largely unknown because few then or since realized that these pioneers were Jewish. I told you, these pioneers were Jewish. Iberian Jews posed as new Christians from Portugal. Again, Iberian Jews posed as new Christians from Portugal. All right, the one settler group that was not required to prove their Catholic ancestry. Most Portuguese operating in the Spanish Empire were new Christians. Again, most Portuguese, all of them. See, it wasn't a majority of Catholic Christians no, the Portuguese one. That's what I'm trying to tell you. When you're reading about the colonial times, the conquista times, right? When the Spaniards and Portuguese came, all right? Again, they're letting you know in this book, most, I would say a lot, most of them, if not all of them, very few, all right? Most of them were actually Moorish, Sephardic, people of color, what they call Portuguese or Spanish, but they were Iberians, right? They were the ones operating in the Spanish Empire. They were the ones who were new Christians. So Columbus and all these people, you know how he brought Christianity. He's the Christ bearer. He was just doing that just to, you know, survive for himself. These were crypto Jews, commonly called conversos, and many maintained their allegiance to their ancestral faith. So they would come with the cross, hey, worship Jesus, right? And they wouldn't even do it. They knew that wasn't them. That wasn't part of their beliefs. Arriving first as explorers and conquistadors, they and the Jewish pioneers who followed soon focused on a field of expertise that had sustained them and made them welcome in the diaspora. All right? So these people, not all were saints. A lot, again, they did whatever they had to do to survive in the enemy world, right? They were so-called explorers too, and conquistador, conquering, conquistadors, people of color, so-called black people. All right, check out my Columbus and his Negro friends video from about 2-3 years ago. We first just started this research and all that, and we went over some of the so-called black, famous black conquistadors, all right, that are known in history. But there was a lot more, because a lot of the people we thought were white were actually so-called black. So it was a lot more, all right? And that included, again, Sephardic Jews and Moriscos, all these people, crypto Muslims, crypto Jews. A mercantile people, Jews in the New World went about their business as traders and ship owners, thus becoming the first merchant class in the Spanish Empire. As long as they pretended to be Christian and delivered the goods, no one questioned their religiosity too closely. They set up the first sugar factories. Who set up the first sugar factories and plantations? Sugar, right? Sugar factory, sugar, slavery, right? Plantation system, Kunta Kinte, right? They told us they brought Africans, and they told us it was white people creating all this stuff. But it was actually Sephardic, people of color, Jews, Iberians, who set up the first sugar factories, pioneered grain, coffee, and tea cultivation, and traded sugar, tobacco, all right? Tobacco, remember the Indians, the Dutch tobacco companies, and the Indians, the pictures of the Indians, the tobacco Indians. Who was doing all that? Also people of color. Gold and silver with covert Jews of the Iberian Peninsula. Covert. They had their networks set up over in Europe still. So they had a great network going back and forth with their covert family members back in the Iberian Peninsula. Covert, secret, undercover, covert, not in the open. Jewish Pirates of the Caribbean is the history of the Sephardic Jews. All right? Okay. I told you guys. All right? Once you get into true, correct history, everything starts coming together. All right? Because the Jewish Pirates of the Caribbean, all right? Forget the Toltec Jewish. Pirates of the Caribbean is the history of Sephardic Jews in the early New World, okay? That whole movie, that was them. Involving intrigue, horror, defeat, survival, and final victory over the hooded inquisitors of the Holy Terror, all right? The Holy Roman Empire. It concludes with their last hurrah, their search for the legendary lost gold mine of Columbus. All right, you hear that? After achieving a Jewish rights in Europe and the New World, 3 Dutch Jews, accompanied by their sons, went into the mountains of Jamaica to find Columbus' mine. They reported that their search was not successful, but I found their map and have reason to believe it was. All right. Make sure to catch the whole video. That was just a little bit. That's a great book. We went over some more information, other sources as well. You gotta understand who the Dutch were, who the Portuguese were, who the Sephardic Jews were, who the Moors were, who the real captains, who the pirates were, who really had the trade network on lockdown, who really was producing sugar, why they were raiding ships, why they were warring with each other. It gets very deep. And again, a lot of these people, castaways, were left behind. Shipwrecks happened, and they were blending in with the indigenous population. So we continue in Access Genealogy, a free genealogy website, castaway, deserters, refugees, and pirates. Now we're going to talk about Sir Francis Drake. at the first Roanoke colony, 1586. Let's see what it says here. It says, after burning St. Augustine, the fleet of Sir Francis Drake sailed north to check on the health of the Roanoke colony. They burned St. Augustine for. Why'd they do that? Because it was in the control of Catholics. The Catholics, their enemies. Who is Sir Francis Drake? We're about to see. In his ships, he carried approximately 386 African slaves and former Turkish prisoners of war captured at St. Augustine. All right, that's the hijack with the whole African slaves. Axis genealogy, that's the hijack, right? We're way past that now. Some scholars have interpreted his archives to indicate that Drake set free on a South Atlantic beach some or all of the men that he carried away from St. Augustine, because he did not have enough food reserves to feed them and resupply the Roanoke colony. Do you hear that? He let all of them go. The so-called African slaves. These are all people of color, right? Black Europeans and Indians. And Indians, not Africans. If the story is true, these freed captives may have been able to survive within the interior of the Southeast. However, there is other evidence that suggests that no freed captives were released at Roanoke Island. Some may have been released elsewhere, but Drake's memoirs are vague on this subject. All right, so real quick, since we're getting into Francis Drake, I invite you to go watch part 3 of Sephardic crypto Moriscos in British colonial America. It says here, Raleigh, Drake, W.D. Fard, Hawkins, more. In this part of the video, they're talking about Walter Raleigh, break down how he is a crypto Jew and how he is a cousin also to Drake, Francis Drake. Yeah, they're cousins. These families were not only heavily intermarried, generation to generation, but also implicated in settling colonial America. The Champernowns, the Raleighs, Gilberts, Drakes, and Carus were ardent Protestants. Who's the Protestants, right? Cryptos, right? By the late 1500s. But before that, they were, we suggest in varying degrees, crypto Jews. They were people of Jewish heritage, mutually recognized, who had begun to dissemble their roots and religion since the forced conversion of English Jews under Edward I in 1290. They were actually Sephardic Jews. All right, and this is a more real depiction of Francis Drake. Shout out to Troy Johnson, who painted this and sent this to us so we can have it and we can break some spells. That's a true depiction of Francis Drake, Sephardic Jew. In this part of the video, talking about Francis Drake, he was born around 1540, kinsman of the Hawkins family, and again the Raleigh family. They're all Sephardic Jews. Drake's resentment of Spain became a passion. They meant the Catholics. He learned sailing, as did most of his compatriots, from Sephardic and Morisco navigators, like Martin Cortez and Pedro de Medina. Continues, says, in May 1572, Drake set sail for Plymouth in a ship named the Swan and the Pasha. Arriving in Panama, he formed an alliance with a group of French Huguenots, privateers. All right, those are his boys, Moors, Huguenot, privateers, other pirates just like him. These, we can surmise, included many crypto Jews, if a study of the antecedents of Huguenots among refugees of the Spanish Inquisition can be believed. All right, they succeeded in capturing a Spanish treasure, right? A Catholic treasure caravan totaling 300 tons of silver. Drake returned to England not only stupendously as a wealthy man, but also a national hero, catapulted to the highest fame. Okay, so again, they were in this personal war with the Catholics, talking about the Moors and the Jews, the people of color against other people of color. It's not about black and white. It's not about the English versus the Spanish. It's a lot deeper than that. All right, now I want to bring you to this other video that I have. It's called Virginia's Not So English Colony. Yeah, these weren't English how they want us to think English. A lot of them were coming from England, Scotland, and Ireland, but they weren't so-called English. Sephardic Morris Jamestown and Roanoke, all right, because we're talking about Roanoke and Axis genealogy. Roanoke, huh? You're saying a lot of people got left behind there? Moors and Sephardic Jews? Genealogical history here. Make sure to catch the whole video. We're going to go over a little part here. In this part of the video, we're in the book, again, Jews and Muslims in British Colonial America, A Genealogical History by Elizabeth Hirschman and Donald Yates. We're in chapter 3 of this book. As you see, Virginia first and not so English colony. And this lets us know who the people of Roanoke really are. Down here it says the stock he proposes of these people as settlers of this new frontier were Englishmen and women who might be regarded as surplus to the needs of their own land. These surplus persons we will show are those recently driven to England by religious persecution in Iberia and France, conversos and Moriscos. That's your Roanoke colony right there, who were adamantly anti-Catholic and desperate enough to climb aboard a cramped, unsafe boat to settle in a faraway terra incognita, an unknown land inhabited by ravening beasts and treacherous natives. All right, they took the risk. They had no choice, these Moors and Sephardic Jews. You guys understand? A lot of the people who are funding this venture or this trip, he goes over it. As you guys can see, if you pause it and read it yourself, are crypto-Jewish, Sephardic, Moorish names. They're helping their people escape the Inquisition that's still going on by the Catholics. Halleck's efforts to promote the planting of Virginia were assisted by his friend Martin Besnier, Sephardic surname, a Parisian printer. He also obtained permissions from cartographers Laudonnière. Remember Laudonnière, who that is? He was the one that built Fort Caroline. He was a Huguenot. Huguenot is a Moor. And Mendoza, Sephardic surname, to reprint portions of their navigational tracts on the New World. This type of international effort to direct surplus persons to a new homeland was quite unlikely to be undertaken except by organizers who had a personal interest in the matter. The monopolization of the British colonization efforts by a handful of interconnected, intermarried families in Cornwall and Devon, chapter 1, right? We went over it in this book, is best explained as a massive refugee relocation effort. They were trying to relocate their people, the refugees, the Iberians, Moors, and Sephardic Jews. Just as Zionists finally succeeded in establishing a state of Israel after the Holocaust, it seems probable that a similar plan underprinted attempt by British crypto-Jews, Sephardic conversos, and Moriscos to establish a new Jerusalem on the Atlantic shores of North America. We're talking about Roanoke and Jamestown here, filled with refugees, Black Europeans. It says here the first voyage to Roanoke in 1584 had as captains Philip Amadas and Arthur Barlowe, both of whom, to judge by their surnames, were almost certainly Sephardic. As before, the ship stopped first at the Canary Islands, a land with a large converso Morisco population. That's where they stopped first. Upon reaching the North American mainland, near Cape Fear, the ship's log discusses Captain Aubrey and Captain Bonneton's Sephardic surname, a trading family later active in Jamaica. The list of colonists left to settle at Roanoke is given in Appendix E. In the original spelling of the time, with a bit of decipherment, the pattern seems clear. Can names such as John Gostigo, Antoine Ruse, Thomas Parre, Joseph Borges, Spanish surname, and Bennett Baruch, Chappell, not to mention just Chappelle, right, like Huguenot, not to mention Dugan Ganis, our friend Joaquim Gans, be those of typical Britons? Obviously not, right? So then it goes on to talk about the second Roanoke colony. It says 2 years later, another colony was established at Roanoke. Its leader was a civilian named John White, an artist and adventurer known to speak Spanish, who evidently had Spanish connections. He was quite familiar with the coastal interior of the Spanish, who attempted in 1571 to establish a mission there. So right here, they're talking about the lost colony in Roanoke, right? We all know what happened in the stories. You know, they didn't really do good. It says here, the only trace left by the second colonist was the word Croatoan, carved in a tree. As before, they present a markedly un-English impression. The occupations of lawyer, professor, mathematician, and the like, as well as the Mediterranean foodstuffs they carried as provisions, do not appear anything like the norm for Northern European pioneers in the New World. All right, they're letting you know these are Sephardic Jews and Moors. The settlement date of 1587 was only 1 year before the well-announced Spanish invasion of England. These surplus persons who had hardly gotten their feet on the ground in England were willingly enlisted as a voyage to America provided the means to escape the feared arrival of the Inquisition. All right, that's deep. Why would they be fearing the Inquisition, the Catholics, these English people? If they were Christian, why would they be so afraid? because they were Sephardic Jews and Moors. Their enemies was the Catholics. They were after them. The Inquisition was about them. The Roanoke people, you see, they were fleeing. That's why they desperately went and tried to colonize this part of America so they can survive. Numerous studies of the so-called lost colony of Roanoke have attempted to locate survivors among the mixed tribes of North Carolina, including the Occaneechi, the Lumbee, Tuscarora, the KOJI, and various Algonquin groups in the area. C.D. Brewington, a distinguished native of Sampson Cove, wrote The 5 Civilized Indian Tribes of Eastern North Carolina, with historical facts about these Indians whose descendants are still here, and evidence of their intermarriage and life with the whites from Sir Walter Raleigh's lost colony, all right, so-called whites. Yet an equal number of books and articles have attempted to demonstrate that the Englishmen and women from Roanoke Colony could not have survived for long in the wilderness, and so never managed to join together with local Indians, right? That was their guess, and that's what they told us in school, so we could just forget about it, so we wouldn't even look for these people, because the reality is that it was Sephardic Jews and Moors. They didn't want us to start looking into this. They claimed that Virginia there, probably a Jewish surname in origin, the first white, so-called white, remember white includes Moors, child born in English America, and John White's granddaughter probably died of starvation, probably in the woods, or fell with an Indian tomahawk in her skull. There are significant genealogical indications of the lost colonies blending with the Indians. All right, and then they go over these names right here. It says more, and all these names you guys can see here: Ephraim, Maynard, Emmanuel, Jacobs, Cobb, Cluas, Green, Chloe Flowers. Continuing on the next page: Davis, Jones, Boone, Bell, Cullop, Grice, Freeman, Green, Sweet, Hess, Carvers, Chavis. So that many of these names are either Melungeon or Sephardic Jewish, or both. A common name in Lumbee tribe that probably derives from a medieval Jewish name is Brave Boy. A 1292 census of Paris lists numerous wealthy Jews from Brabant, a Flemish city with ties to the cloth, weaving in the woolen industry of Lombardy. The Brabant Brebois, Bradby, a family that supplied multiple chiefs to the Pamunkey Indians of Virginia, may be a corruption. Bradby, Brabant. These are Sephardic Jewish names, a lot of them, and they were mixing with the American Indians, and that's okay. All right, so I just wanted to go ahead and go over that since we were talking about Roanoke and Axis genealogy. Make sure to get the whole video. You know, it's 2 hours and 40 minutes long. Make sure to get all the information. Very good video. Again, shout out to Troy Johnson. So back in Axis genealogy, they talk about the second Roanoke colony. We didn't read that yet. Just going to go ahead and read that. It says in 1587, 112 men, women, and child were left stranded on Roanoke Island, North Carolina, with no scouts, no experienced hunters or fishermen, no hope of feeding themselves on the infertile soil and surrounded by hostile natives. So why would they do that? Why would they not bring anybody who can hunt or fish? Because they didn't have time. They just brought whoever they can bring. They weren't planning on bringing experts to colonize. They were fleeing. Now we understand, right? It would be 3 years before Governor John White would be able to return briefly to check on their well-being. They were gone. They had disassembled their houses before leaving. There were no skeletons or signs of violence. It is one of America's favorite historical legends, all right? So anything people say is conjecture. And when you think logically, and you know the Indians, a lot of them are friendly. If they conducted themselves in peace with the indigenous population and knowing that some of these tribes are friendly, they would have asked for help and they might have helped them survive. All right, continuing an Axis genealogy website. They have a part right here that says English colonists from Virginia. All right, English. Remember, we just read not so English. A lot of those so-called English were actually Sephardic Jews and Moors. So there are several published 17th century books reported that a party of English colonists in 1621 had originally planned to settle in Virginia, but arrived on the coast just as the massacres of the Powhatan Rebellion were occurring. The colonists headed south, but were persuaded by either the ship's captain or someone on board the ship to seek refuge in the Appalachian Mountains, all right? The reason they did that is because we're going to read the Appalachian king was very friendly for some reason with the Sephardic Jews and the Moors, people that were fleeing the Catholics. So somebody on board knew that. He said, let's go to the Appalachian Mountains. The king of the Appalachian let them stay in the KOJI Valley. The colonists found the place so agreeable that they asked to settle there permanently. As will be discussed in part 6, several French Huguenot eyewitnesses encountered the descendants of the English colonists in the late 1600s and worshipped with them in Protestant chapels. So you understand that the king even let them stay there and practice their religion and build churches and everything. We're about to read that, okay? Before we read that, just to corroborate again, as it says here, Sephardic Jews, the first European colonists of the southern highlands, Helen, Salty, and the Nakochi Valley. And we'll go to this part. It says Portuguese conversos flee to the New World. The evidence of European occupation of the southern highlands prior to the arrival of the Cherokees. Who's the Cherokees? We're going to break that down, right? You guys already know that's a confederation of a lot of different people. That word didn't exist here before Europeans arrived. So before the Cherokee arrived in this area, there's a whole history there too. So the European occupation of the southern highlands prior to the arrival of the Cherokees is substantial, but has never been researched by professional archaeologists. No professional effort has been made to locate the Dukes Creek Spanish village site. Almost all the evidence suggests that the Spanish colonists in the southern highlands were Jewish. Some vague North Carolina cultural memories recall Portuguese miners living in the mountains. These were, in fact, Sephardic Jews who escaped Iberia via Portugal. They told strangers that they were Portuguese so as to conceal their Jewish heritage, all right? We read that earlier with the Melungeons. All right, I want to read this part here regarding Sequoia, all right? One of the many mysteries about Sequoia is his skills as a silversmith. From age 10 to 15, he lived with his mother on the Little Tennessee River. He then joined the Chickamauga guerrillas, with whom he fought continuously until 1793. When most of their army was killed at the Battle of Etowah Cliffs in what is now downtown Rome, Georgia, all right? The Chickamauga were at constant war. Sequoia took refuge in the Natchez Cherokee village of Pine Log. He immediately started making a handsome living as a skilled silversmith. In his spare time, he developed his famous syllabary. The syllabary that Sequoia created incorporated letters identical to those of medieval Georgian script. Really? So his letters were very identical to, they're talking about Georgia, the country, right? In medieval times, but he's in Georgia already in America. So how do we know this is not the original Georgia? And he's just writing what his ancient ancestors wrote too. But that's an interesting thing, right? Which was based on the Jewish Aramaic script. Jewish Aramaic script, that's what the medieval Georgian script is based off. Elias Bodinat, editor of the Cherokee Phoenix newspaper, changed Sequoia's original design so that they would resemble Roman-style lettering. So he switched it up so people wouldn't put two and two together. How did Sequoia learn how to create fine silverware? How could he have possibly known medieval Aramaic and Georgian script? The possible answers point towards his father actually being a Sephardic silversmith. Oh, we know his mom was an American Indian. Who was his dad? Who was Sequoia's dad? His dad was a Sephardic silversmith. The word Sequoia was originally his mother's name and has no meaning in Cherokee, but in his Creek language form meant war captive in the 1700s. There is currently no knowledge of exactly what happened to the conversos of the southern highlands. There is a hybrid population in the mountains of Virginia, Tennessee, and Kentucky who call themselves the Melungeons. Many have found to carry Mediterranean DNA along with DNA of Northern Europeans and Native Americans. However, it is not likely that the Sephardic gold miners of the Nakochi Valley traveled northward through Cherokee territory to escape the Cherokees. Those that survived Cherokee attacks may have moved to French Louisiana, which had no Inquisition. All right, so now they're going to show the writing. So this is the one they try to make into look like European writing, cursive, right? And this is Sequoia's original writing. You guys see? It looks very Aramaic. Many of the letters in Sequoia's original syllabary are identical to those of Aramaic and medieval Georgian. Right now we're going to read the book, The History of the Caribbean Islands. All right, and it's a long title. This was written originally by Charles Rochefort and translated into English, right? This is from 1666, all right? Very old book, primary source. Around page 240 of this book is talking about when they say the Appalachians met God, or actually were introduced to Christianity. and it was by the French Huguenot Ribald. They tell you right here, he brought it and he left the seed there. As it says here in 242, these happy beginnings and first fruits of the gospel of our Savior, of Jesus, I dodged the hijack, were afterwards augmented and advanced by the cares of Monsieur the Admiral de Coligny, who gave a commission to one de Laudonnière. Remember Laudonnière? He was the one that established Fort Caroline. He was French Huguenot. All right, this is a Moor. To carry over thither a considerable supply of soldiers and all sorts of tradesmen, which arrived in the year 1564. But their last adventurers had hardly taken the air in the country after their arrival thither, the Spaniard who imagines that all America belongs to him, and who have ever been jealous of the French nation, made his advancement of the disorders which were then in that country. All right, so basically what they're saying is, he invited, the French Huguenots, Laudonnière. Remember, he built Fort Caroline and other forts. But as soon as they were established there, he's saying the Spanish came and went after the French nation, but it's actually Catholics versus, the Protestants, or the Huguenots. So they go on to say that they sent Peter Melendez, we already got the story, right? With 6 great ships full of men and ammunition, who fell upon it on the 19th of September. It says here, continuing down, says Captain Ribald fell in the massacre. But de la Donnière, remember he escaped, made it swift to escape through the fence to the ships newly come from France, which by good fortune were still in the road. Some others of the inhabitants who upon the first arrival of the Spaniards had foreseen the danger likely to fall upon them got in time into the woods. I letting you know that a lot of these Huguenots had already bounced. They had gone into the woods. All right, they survived. They mixed with the Indians. And in the night time came to the village of their good friend Saturiova. All right, they went to their Timicuan chieftain friend, who hating the Spaniard gave them protection and supplied them with provisions for a competent subsistence till the year, and you guys can break down the year, when Captain de Gorgis, all right, now we're talking about Captain de Gorgis, we just read about him, right? And what he did, he got his revenge, right? Coming to Florida with 3 stout ships full of resolute men and all sorts of ammunition. Remember, he was coming. He had a plan. Severely punished the cruelty of the Spaniards, and being assisted by the Saturova, right, with the help of the Indians, right? This Huguenot, with the help of the Indians, took over the Catholics, and all his neighbors and allies. He revenged the public injuries of the French, put into the sword all the Spaniards he met with, not only in the fort of Carolina, which they had repaired and fortified after their usurpation of it, but also those he found in 2 other forts which they had built along the coast, which he burned and demolished, as may be seen in the 12th chapter of the 4th book of the description of the West Indies, written by John de la Haye. The memorials which Captain de Gorgis caused to be printed, giving an account of his expedition into Florida, tell us of a certain Frenchman named Peter Dubry, who, having made his escape to King Saturovia to avoid the cruelty of the Spaniards, related to him that there escaped of that massacre but 10 men, of which number he was one, that they all met with a safe retreat in the territories of the said prince, who lived not far from their desolated colony, that 3 of the escaped persons did there some months after that defeat, that of the 7 remaining, there were 6 were so charmed with the advantageous relation with the subjects of Saturovia made to them daily of the treasures of King Maura, of the powerfulness of another whose name was Olaca, who commanded 40 princes, and of the generosity and prudent conduct of the king of the Appalachia, who governed many fair and large provinces seated at the foot of the mountains, and reaching into several delightful vales which they encompassed, that they importuned Saturovia, who had entertained them so kindly that he would be pleased to allow them guides to conduct them to the frontiers of the kingdom of the last name, of whom they had heard so many miracles, and had particularly this recommendation, that he was a lover of strangers, and that his subjects were the most civilly governed of all the septentrional part of America. The Saturovia, willing to add that favor to all those they had received from him before, gave them a good convoy, consisting of the most valiant of his subjects, to conduct them with all safety to all his allies to the dominions of the king of Appalachia, if they were desirous to visit him. All right, so it goes on. I just wanted you guys to see that, yeah, Moors and Sephardic Jews were being treated good a lot of the time by many indigenous tribes, in this case, the Timucua chiefdoms and the Appalachites people. The king of the Appalachia was very well known to be very friendly with anybody going against the Catholics. So that was Moors and Sephardic Jews. Now continuing in page 245, we're going to get to the part where an Axis genealogy was telling us that there was some English families that made their way into the Appalachian Mountains. So after the French Huguenots were in this area, you know, spreading the Christianity, right, their Protestantism, these English families, the ones that they were talking about in Axis genealogy, actually came again with the whole Christian thing. It says these families came out of Virginia in the year, and it says MDC XX1, that's 1621. I was able to verify that one, as you guys can see, with an intention to go to New England to avoid the frequent incursions and massacres committed there by the savages. But the wind proving contrary to their design, they were cast on the coast of Florida. When they passed into the province of Matica, and thence into those of Amana and Bemaring, in the last they settled themselves, and have drawn thither a considerable number of ecclesiastics and persons of quality, who have there laid the foundations of a small colony. Most of those who are retired into those places so remote from all commerce in the world undertook that generous design in the midst of the great revolutions which happened in England during the late troubles, and the main business they proposed to themselves at that time was only to make their advantage of so seasonable a retreat that they might the more seriously and with less distractions mind the attainment of their own salvation and dilate the limits of Christianity among those poor people, if God gave them the means. All right, if you guys didn't understand that, these English families, as it was telling us in Axis genealogy, how the king of Appalachia allowed them to you know, practice their Protestantism, and they even met French Huguenots who started practicing with them. That's what they're saying. They made a lot of ecclesiastics or people like them, right? These were the French Huguenots who had already been there. A lot of the survivors of Fort Caroline and a lot of the French people, again, that survived Fort Caroline, the attack of the Catholics, ended up with the king of Appalachia. They were already there. They were so happy to meet these English families, and then they started creating their churches and stuff and congregations and spreading the Christianity. Yeah, these are black folks doing that to American Indians. We understand also by the last papers that have been sent us from America that God blessing the endeavors of the first inhabitants of this small colony. They have within 12 or 13 years baptized most of the officers and the most considerable heads of families in the provinces of Bemarin and Amana. All right, look what they're doing. They're evangelizing all the Indians. These are Moors and Sephardic Jews. That at the present they have bishop and many learned a zealous ecclesiastic among them, who carry on the work of the Lord, and the more to advance it, they have built colleges in all those places, colleges where there are churches, that the children of the Appalachites may be introduced in the mysteries of Christian religion and true piety. All right, you see what happened? They let them settle in there, and then they started spreading the Christianity, and the Indians went for it. American Indians, right? So it wasn't always by force. It wasn't always by force. We're actually going to get into this book a lot more now that I found it. It contains a lot of great info, first-hand accounts. I love reading these old books because it's primary sources. You can see what they were saying, but I'm going to end it right there. Going back to Access Genealogy, Free Genealogy website, I just want to show you guys and let you know that, you know, we kind of read everything in this article: castaways, deserters, refugees, and pirates, all the different topics here in all this video. Hope you guys enjoyed the breakdown and the corroboration and showing you that this is not pseudo, this is actually history. The Moors, Sephardic Jews were the first colonists, and they were here before the so-called English were also their people. But this was already happening in the 1500s, and many of them assimilated, amalgamated with the indigenous population of America. I wanted you guys to make sure to remember that. It does exist in a lot of people's genealogy, and just embrace every part of your lineage, every line. It's very deep. There's a deep history behind every person on your tree, except what happened, the good, the bad, the ugly. It's not about pointing fingers, because truth is never one-sided. The past is the past. It's all about knowing thyself truly. Again, these people did mix in with American Indians, and we shouldn't have to sugarcoat that at all or feel any way about it, you know? It's just history. Hope you guys enjoyed this presentation. Shout out to the real ones out there. Hope you guys enjoyed this longer video. Much love and respect. Pura vida, mi gente. Hawa.
to anger people. So I still maintain a forbidden Twitter file on my computer. These are tweets that, no, I'm not going to post it. Even though it's true, objectively true, it would be too upsetting to people. Is there another way? So anytime that happens, like, oh my gosh, okay, let me see if I can tune that differently next time.
But if you know it's true and you believe it's important, you still might not post it because it might upset people.
In ways that are not productive.
Give me an example.
No, I will quote my father.
Okay.
It's not good enough to be right. You also have to be effective. If you're not effective, go home. Doesn't matter if you are in the right. So if I post something that just creates more divisiveness, I need to find another way to achieve the same goal without the conflict. So no, I'm not just about put the truth out there, and if it triggers landmines, so what? It's the truth. No, that's not being an educator.
There's a point here I really want to answer for my own, something I've been thinking a lot about. As we see this polarization in every facet of conversation and public discourse, I've started to think that maybe the antidote is the very few amongst us that have the guts to stand by the truth regardless of the arrows they take. And I'm seeing that a little bit with some big commentators. I shan't name names because that'll be a headline. But I'm thinking actually their bravery, I guess, and their courage to say the truth regardless of the fact they're going to get piled on because it doesn't fit the narrative is actually helping us. It's helping us almost, it's helping.
It moves the needle a little.
Yeah.
Okay, so I see that. I'm just saying, I believe, however delusionally, that you can achieve the same goal without angering people.